Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on whichever part of the world you're signing in from. Welcome. Welcome to Cultural Intelligence Center's first virtual conference, Stories and Statistics. Thank you for being here. Just a few housekeeping things before we move on. I am Ritika Wadhwa, the Chief Operating Officer for Cultural Intelligence Center in the UK. This is in Zoom, I've been told. Yes, it isn't. So I don't need to go through the you are being recorded, we can't see you, we can't hear you. And this whole thing will be available recorded later on as well. But there is a stage chat option. So I would love for you to say hello. Where are you dialing in from? Who are you? Possibly what you do, what you hear, so that I know for sure that there's people that have signed on to this. And there's someone that's listening to me because I can't hear or see anyone right now. So please feel free to chat. Put your name and introduce yourself on the chat. Um, yes, okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to. Excellent. Okay, we've got Tanya here from Australia. So it was good that I did say good evening. That's great. Daniela calling from Pakistan. Amazing. Welcome, everyone. So, as I said, I am Rutika, Chief Operating Officer, Cultural Intelligence Center in the UK. And so, what is this conference about? What are we going to cover in the next 3 hours? Here's what you're going to hear in the next 3 hours. I personally believe that there are two types of leaders in this world, possibly three: a heart led leader, a head led leader, and those that are heart and head led. What I mean by heart led is someone who leads from the heart, and stories is what calls them. And those that are led by the head, where it's all about data and statistics. So, how do we appeal to these heart and head led leaders? And in my work through cultural intelligence, I found that this is the absolutely secret sauce that works for both heart led and head led leaders. And this is why we came up with this conference on cultural intelligence, stories, and statistics. I want to read out something from this beautiful book that I picked up about how your story sets you free. In the book, Hansen says, a story is the only way to activate parts in the brain so that the listener turns the story into their own idea and experience. This has tremendous implications for the power of story. People adopt your experience as their own in the moment. This allows us to cultivate empathy in powerful ways. So with that beautiful note, I am a heart-led leader, and the work that I've done with the Cultural Intelligence Center for me has been led through my heart. The impact that it makes on leaders. We work with leaders across different sectors and various types of challenges, right? From how do I build empathy in my managers when they give feedback, to how do I embed this in the DEI practice? How do I make leaders flexible, adaptable, more working towards and with the managers in an aligned way? So those are the various reasons why cultural intelligence comes into play. And this is why we've got this wonderful afternoon planned of various speakers that will bring those stories alive. What is their purpose? What is their why? What brought them to cultural intelligence? We also have the wonderful founder of Cultural Intelligence Center, Lynn Van Dyne. We are so fortunate to have her here today talking to us about the data, about the research, and what makes CQ so potent in the world that we operate in today. So you're all in for an absolute treat. Of listening into the stories, of listening into the data, and coming away from this hopefully inspired and motivated. So that's my introduction. I do want to also apologize actually upfront, because our first speaker, Richard Stanton, just called me about half an hour ago to say that unfortunately he can't be on this because of personal reasons, and my heart goes out to him for that, and I hope that everything is okay in his family. as he works through that emergency. So the team, the CQC UK team, have had to come up with an alternative solution to fill in those 20 minutes, and we will make sure that we use those 20 minutes in the best way possible. To that extent, what I would like to do is use the 20 minutes to really go back to the CQ framework, talk about what is CQ, what is culture, and how that fits into the work that we're doing. I would love to welcome my colleague Polly onto the stage with me. And once we have introduced the cultural intelligence framework, Polly, my other colleague Emily, so the CQC UK team, will go into story mode and discuss what is it that called us to cultural intelligence. After that, the schedule will carry on as planned and in your agenda. So, Polly, if I could please have you on stage as I. Hi, Polly.
Hello.
I am going to share my screen. I hope everyone can see that. Polly, you can see it?
I can see it, so I'm hoping everybody else can.
Excellent. So, why cultural intelligence? Before we go into why cultural intelligence, a little bit about culture, really. Culture is the set of behaviors that we identify with. John Amechi says culture is the way, not John Amechi, culture is the way we do things around here. And so, cultural intelligence then is the capability to function and relate effectively in culturally diverse situation. The key words here is capability and effectively. Sorry. And we will go into the details of the framework. But before that, just a little bit on the research, because we do have Lynn Van Dyne joining us later. There is the cultural intelligence framework has 20 years of research behind it, surveyed in across more than 250 countries. 250,000 people surveyed across 148 countries. So this is a solid bit of work and research that has gone behind the framework, and isn't something that has just been picked off the shelf. It's been around for a long time with peer-reviewed papers and studies. So, Polly, over to you to discuss the cultural intelligence framework.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ritika. So the framework, as you see, is made up of sort of 4 key dimensions, and they're all extremely important, but we tend to start with drive, CQ drive, because really this is about, your motivation. How interested are you in improving your cultural intelligence and in working effectively with people from different cultural backgrounds? If you don't want to do it, you won't. This is motivation is key in terms of how much you will persist when things get difficult and how confident you are in those kind of intercultural interactions. So it all really starts with your why. And in fact, that's what we're going to be asking a lot of our speakers when they come on to talk about their why. Then we move on to CQ knowledge. This is just really where a lot of sort of typical trainings might sit. It's all about your understanding about how cultures are similar to each other and how they're different, the norms and the values across different cultures. And we talk a lot about cultural values at the CQ Centre. In fact, there are 10 key cultural values that people can express their preferences on when they take one of our assessments. So there are these 10 different values, and they range from things like how expressive you are, as opposed to, how non-expressive or how direct or indirect a communicator you are. Those are the cultural values that we always refer back to. And then we come on to strategy. What do you do? So you want to interact with people from different backgrounds. You found out lots about them, but now what? It can't end there. You have to plan ahead and strategize in order to really be effective in those intercultural kind of interactions. So not just planning ahead, but also revising your assumptions as and when you're in the middle of an encounter, and then sort of reflecting afterwards on, were your assumptions met, because things never seem to go according to plan. And then the all-important piece, action. your ability to adapt when relating and working in multicultural contexts. This is all about behavior change. You know, how do you adapt the words that you use, maybe the tone that you use, maybe how your non-verbal gestures, how close you stand to someone, whether you look someone in the eye, that sort of thing. These are all the kinds of behavioral changes that we're talking about. And altogether, that's cultural intelligence, which is all about being able to adapt in different contexts, different cultural contexts.
Thank you for that, Polly. That was sorry. Can you has the
screen, the slides have gone, but yeah, I can still
excellent,
hear.
good. Thank you for that. That was really useful, I think, and I hope it was for everyone on the who's attending our event today. Right. So, I would love to bring our darling Emily. Darling, I'm not sure she would like to be called that. Hi, Emily. Right, everyone.
Hello.
This is our beautiful, magnanimous, phenomenal Cultural Intelligence Center UK team, all in one frame. The wonderful Polly and the wonderful Emily. And so we're going to use the next sort of 15 minutes or less than that, as Polly will then go into for the next panel discussion on our stories. And before we get into that, I want to read another little paragraph out, which is, right now, there's someone out there. It may be a friend, a cousin, or a stranger across the world who needs to hear your specific story. Your story has the power to shape how someone else sees themselves. But because we so often stay buttoned up and either hide or discredit our story, we deny the world our unique wisdom. So on that note, Emily, would you love to share your unique wisdom on your story and what really called you to the Cultural Intelligence Center?
Well, wisdom, first of all. The pressure's really on. I wasn't expecting to be on stage today. I was meant to be hiding behind the scenes and making sure everything happens. So, yeah, it's a bit of a shock to be in the limelight, but I'll do my best. Before I do that, Ritika, we had a question from Frida who would like to know the name of the book that you mentioned earlier. So before I start, if you wouldn't mind sharing that, How Your Story Sets You Free. I can't see the author, so what we can do is pop that in the chat later.
Yeah, I'll do that now. And I am ever so grateful, Emily, because with half an hour notice, you're in the limelight. Your hair looks great.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so grateful.
No, it's actually it's a real pleasure to be here. So really, when I started with the Cultural Intelligence Center about 18 months ago, I knew nothing about cultural intelligence, literally zero. And I'm kind of hoping there are people joining us today who are kind of in a similar position, who are kind of intrigued by it, interested in it, but don't actually know too much about what it's all about. I studied intercultural communication at postgraduate level some years ago, but looking back now, I kind of realized that the work I did back then was more about sort of transactional culture, national and international culture, and also about cultural awareness rather than actually getting under the skin of what culture is. So it's not that I didn't have any idea of cultural differences and understanding, but that's where the limit of my knowledge was. So since joining the CQ Center from literally, well, zero pretty much, it was it's been quite a steep learning curve for me, because obviously there's been the need to learn about the products, what the company does, how it started, but also kind of understanding my own behavior, my own biases, my own ways of looking at the world through the lens or lenses that I use, how everything that I am and everything that I've sort of been brought up to be impacts on the way I am with colleagues, friends, clients. And it's been a really kind of really interesting journey, and it's by no means over. So this has just been the last year and a half in the making, and it's a constant adaptation. We talked about CQ being a flexible capability. We can all improve our CQ. It's not a fixed thing, whereas our cultural values are a little bit more static because they're more about, you know, what we've learned and the environment we've grown up in and what we've kind of accepted to be reality. CQ is very much something that we can learn, improve, and develop, and also learn from each other. So learning from you, Ritika. Ritika is the CQ Centre guru, really. I'm sure a lot of people joining today know Ritika very well, and know just how much knowledge she has about CQ and how impactful her work is. She's on mute, so she can't say anything. But no, she really is. So I've learned an awful lot from Ritika, also from Polly. Polly and I recognize that culturally, in many ways, we are very similar. But we do also have differences between us, and even the smallest differences can have a real impact. So this journey that I've been on has been steep, it's been rich, it's been ongoing, it's still ongoing. And I personally see the need for cultural intelligence only becoming greater and bigger and more important as we move, you know, into the future. Really, the world is getting smaller and smaller, and so it's more and more important that we really get to grips with how important this tool is. And what better way to do it than through us? I know it's not a sales conference. I couldn't help myself. But that's really where I've come to the CQ Centre from. Hello, Alicia. Hello, Oana. Hello, everybody who's saying hi in the chat. Yeah, I don't know if I think I've waffled on enough. I'm going to go backstage again now to prepare for our next speaker, so I'm not abandoning you. But it's really great to be here, and I will stay in the background. So I'll hand back to you, Ritika.
Thank you so much, Emily. Oh, the wonderful Emily. What would we do without her, Polly?
Right? I don't know.
Right, Polly, tell us your story.
So yeah, I mean, for me, the short answer is I'd done an MSc in cross-cultural psychology a few years ago, and I was looking to become an intercultural trainer, and I wanted to find a framework to get sort of trained up on that would allow me to do work with people who were struggling with sort of international challenges, but also that would support diversity and inclusion initiatives, which I was increasingly becoming interested by and drawn to. And cultural intelligence very much is that. And I know this isn't a sales conference, but you know, I do spend my days enthusing about it, and that is one of the things that drew me to it. So last year, I did the certified our training to become a certified facilitator, and that's how I came to cultural intelligence before I started working for the company full time. But the sort of slightly longer answer is that I've just always been fascinated by other cultures. I guess I've had high CQ drive, and I don't know exactly why, but I have memories of sitting under my grandparents' dining room table, looking at all their funny old-fashioned, they were even old-fashioned then, Collins phrase books for all the different countries. They were big travelers. They loved, you know, traveling and going on holiday, and they'd been to lots of different countries. And I was obsessed with these different phrase books. So I'd read those, but I think I was also very lucky because through my dad's job, I'd lived in several different countries. I'd lived in Ireland in a little village and went to a Catholic school in the south of Ireland for a term when I was 6 years old, and I'd also spent 6 months living in Mexico. So I was exposed to early on to different cultures. And of course, I grew up in very multicultural London, where my school was very diverse, you know, both internationally and also sort of socioeconomically. And my two best friends, one was the daughter of a rabbi and one was the daughter of a vicar. And I had been brought up in a very non-religious home. So all of that was kind of fascinating to me. And I'd been exposed to quite a lot of difference, even from, like I say, quite a young age. So perhaps that's why I've always been interested. And I've ended up had a whole career working in international book publishing. And I loved just, you know, talking to people from every continent around the world. And I then went on and lived in the US and in Italy and in Costa Rica. So I guess that's, for me, it's normal. Like I'm just always interested by other people and other perspectives, which isn't to say that it isn't really challenging sometimes. And certainly living in Costa Rica as a young woman in my late 20s, living on my own in San Jose, as I was then, was definitely really eye-opening. And it was not the same as living even in a country like Italy, where I'd already spent a couple of years living. So it was very interesting to me, and I think you can never stop learning. And even when you think you know something about a culture, when I lived in the US for 3 years, and I thought I had preconceived ideas about what Americans were like and what it would be like to live in the US, and it was actually not exactly as I thought. So just when you think even cultures are similar as the UK and the US are, there are a huge number of differences and all sorts of things to learn. So I guess I'm just up for the learning. And I just think you get enriched by spending time with people who are different from you. So I guess that's why I'm here. I just want to sort of pass on that bug to other people.
Love it, Polly. I mean, that rich tapestry of your experience from childhood to now, and how paths cross and how we end up where we do, bringing all our rich experiences to where we are today. And your story is phenomenal in that you've had the privilege of all these experiences. However, I want to step back for the audience and say, just because someone has traveled or has these experiences doesn't mean that they're automatically curious. Polly is, fortunately. So someone like Polly had the fortune to travel the world, to make friends with people that are completely different from her. But I can see in Polly, and she knows it herself, is this innate CQ drive, the curiosity, the why that motivates her to do this work, to learn more, to carry on learning. And what I find one of the best parts of the CQ work and the CQ framework is the drive, because if that drive isn't there, then really, what is the common purpose? How are people working together? What is the motivation for them to work together? And so unpacking that drive, if it's there, great. How can we make use of that going further? And if it's not there, how can we develop it? So I think I've got 2 minutes for my story, and I probably need 2 hours, don't I, Polly?
You definitely do, and I'm sorry that your story's left to last, because it's
no. I reveal plenty of that in various ways anyway. So in a nutshell, born and brought up in India in a very patriarchal system and society as a woman, obviously, and that set the stage for what I could and could not do and my capability. And then I moved to the UK and subsequently Canada, and then back again to the UK for studies, for work. And those are the can of worms, as I say, opened up, because suddenly I felt free. I could wear what I want. I could eat what I want. I could stay out as late as I want, which would be unheard of in India. And but with that came another layer of the fact that I didn't feel like I belonged in these countries. I was suddenly a woman of color, a first-generation immigrant with a funny accent. And that's the stuff that it didn't quite click as I was going through that journey. And only after 15 years of living in the UK that something clicked around what are all these experiences that I've had as an individual, as someone who's traveled internationally, lived in different continents. How can I bring all of this together to make the world a better place? And this is what led me to CQ and the CQ Center, the whole amalgamation of me as a person, my experiences, and a framework that lent to these experiences so beautifully that I felt like I could use the framework to make the change, the impact with purpose. Because I didn't want others that look like me to have those same experiences. And CQ has the capability to open up, shape, flex, adapt, learn, motivate, inspire. And that's me really in a nutshell. So thank you for bearing with us. I hope you've enjoyed our stories. I want to now hand back to Polly, who will bring Jennifer Izikor, our wonderful partner in the UK. And I will see you all in a little bit.
Hello, Jennifer. Oh, you're on mute. I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself, or if that's something someone can do for you.
I'm off mute. Can you hear me?
There we go. Yes, I can hear you. Well, I just wanted to say I'm really delighted to introduce you, Jennifer. We're so happy to have you with us today. I know that for the last 5 years or so, you've been doing phenomenal work using CQ for inclusive leadership in the public sector. For those who don't know her, Jennifer is the founder and CEO of Above Difference, which is an award-winning organization in the inclusive leadership and equality, diversity and inclusion landscape in the UK. And she is a strategic partner of the Cultural Intelligence Centre in the UK. Jennifer is herself an advanced cultural intelligence trainer and facilitator, as well as being a certified leadership coach, trainer and speaker with the John Maxwell team. And she brings a wealth of public sector leadership experience as a senior civil servant, public appointee, CEO, trustee, and public sector non-executive director to her facilitation and training. So welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being here. I want to stop talking. I've already spoken more than I'd planned to. So I would love to hear from you. I've given you a little bit of an introduction, but I'd love to hear from you. You know, what's your story? What's led you to do the work that you do?
Well, firstly, Polly, thank you so much for having me, and to you, Ritika and Emily, for setting up this wonderful event. And I was just listening to you guys in the green room, and it's just fascinating what brings all of us to this particular place and brings us together. So my story, in many ways, there's a balance of a sort of personal and professional story. So I was born in the UK and then went back to Nigeria when I was about 7 years old, which is where I spent most of my adolescent life, and then came back to the UK in my early 20s, and I've lived and worked here ever since. And I suppose in that sense, I've always felt, it was interesting, Nika was just saying a few moments earlier, that I think when you do that, you always have that sense of standing across two cultures anyway, and never quite feeling totally at home in either one. Because I spent my formative years in the UK. But having said that, I think what brought me particularly to what I do now was probably my experiences in the public sector, because I started my professional career in the public sector. I started working with young homeless people in what was then Centrepoint, and then in the public sector, and across various parts of that sector.
Oh, I've lost you, Jennifer. I'm not sure if other people can hear or if it's just me.
And EDI not working. Polly, you frozen, so I'm hoping I haven't.
You froze for me briefly. I'm not sure whether it's me or you. I hope it's whatever. I hope everyone else can hear.
was just that sense of the frustration of, how could we do this better?
I now have totally lost Jennifer, so I'm assuming other people have too. Very frustrating, because she's got so much to share with us, I know. Hi.
Hello, I'm back on stage again. I really wasn't expecting this. I need to apologise. I'm not sure what's going on with Jennifer's connection, but Polly, you've been all at sea a little bit on this one. So
a little bit, because I wasn't sure whether it was me or Jennifer, because I do sometimes have problems, but it does seem like it's Jennifer. So
yeah, it is Jennifer. So bizarrely, it's now you and me on the stage, which was really unexpected. So what we could use is the option to perhaps have a Q&A from people in the chat of what they've heard so far. We are completely working on getting Jennifer back. So in the meantime, we can bring Ritika back on stage if anybody has any questions. I'm hoping you can hear us. Fingers crossed. Anybody in the chat, if you could say whether you can hear and see us, that would be great. All going according to plan, isn't it? The wonders of technology. So let's see.
There's suggestions on the stage chat, so just for Jennifer to turn off her video, but I don't know, that's presumably an option.
So Jennifer's logged out temporarily, so we are going to work on getting her back again. Does anybody have any You can hear us, Frida. This is wonderful news. Thank you. So Jennifer is actually back. So we're going to try and get her back on stage, and fingers crossed we'll be able to do that. So I'm going to bring her back, and I will then disappear again. Okay, say a little prayer for us, everyone. Bear with me just a second. Hi, Jennifer. Let's get you back on.
Jennifer.
Oh.
Right. Can you hear me now?
Do that.
Yes, we can. Fingers crossed.
Oh,
it
wonderful.
lasts.
I just
So
logged in on
sorry.
Chrome. So I wonder if it was Safari. It might have been Safari that was playing up. And so
Oh, could be. I don't know.
that could happen. Okay. So yeah, so as I was saying, so I joined the public sector. I became a leader in the public sector. I was fortunate to be, one of the few Black women leading in that space. And while I was surrounded by lots of issues around inclusion, I think I was also fascinated by how we did it better. How could we find a different space in which to have these conversations that didn't feel as painful times for all involved. And I remember coming across cultural intelligence and actually coming across David Livermore's book first and being really fascinated by what he had to say about cultures and how cultures work together or the differences between them. And then I got to go in 2016, I got to go on the facilitation course, and I have to say, I just sat there with these light bulbs, and I love that. That's why I love, doing the job I do, because people always talk about light bulb moments, and I had that, and for me, I think I've never looked back. It was just recognizing that here was a tool that could bring everything together and could actually equip people with ways of engaging with people who are different from them in beautiful ways, and so that's it, and I set up Above Difference shortly after. Really, wanted to bring this into the public sector, and I think we've led the way in doing that. And I've just been amazed to see the transformations that occur when people begin to really understand how cultural intelligence is such a powerful tool to create ways in which people can engage more effectively.
Oh, that's just I love hearing that, and I would really love to just dig a bit deeper and ask you about the link between CQ and inclusive leadership. Like, what do you see? Maybe you can explain to people listening what the link is there.
Well, I think that's a link that fascinates me a lot. And I often say to people, especially when I'm working with leaders, we worked out last month that we've probably worked with nearly 3,500 leaders across the public sector. And one of the things I say to leaders is that the aim isn't to be culturally intelligent. The aim is to be able to use culturally intelligent to be a better inclusive leader. And the reason I make that distinction is that, years back, we all wanted to understand unconscious bias. And I always used to say to Dave Livermore that, I hoped that CQ didn't become another UB where we kind of went to tick box. I've done a CQ training course, I get it. And actually, that's half the journey. One of my favorite definitions of inclusive leadership is one by, I think, the Employers Network for Equality and Inclusion, and they describe it as leaders who understand their own biases and preferences and actively seek out and engage with diverse perspectives. And in many ways, that's a definition of the model of cultural intelligence, because your CQ knowledge means that you gain a deeper understanding of why people act the way they do. And you understand why you act the way you do. And you understand what it means when you relate to people who are different from you. But as Ritika said earlier, that in itself doesn't make a difference unless you're, and I call it not just being about being an inclusive leader, but being an intentionally inclusive leader. Yeah, and that's what I talk to my leaders about, is being intentional in your inclusive leadership and applying that knowledge in such a way that you begin to shape and engage with the cultures around you. Edgar Schein says that the only thing of real importance that leaders do is shape and manage culture. And if you're not doing it consciously, it will happen whether you like it or not. And so the link for me is between a leader who understands how they can apply their cultural intelligence and uses that in an intentional way to create inclusive workplaces around them and inclusive services and inclusive cultures. And I think it's all about leaders who understand that, the aim is not to have another tool that you just kind of tick box off, because actually I think one of the things that the culturally intelligent and inclusive leader knows is what they don't know. That's the most powerful thing, and actually staying.
Yes, I love that. Yeah.
It's all about saying, when I'm going into a new situation, when I'm working with a member of staff who may be different from me, what is it I don't know? What are my assumptions, and how are those going to shape that interaction? And that's why I think it's such a powerful tool.
Oh, thank you for that, Jennifer. That's really, really, that really resonates. I'm just wondering, there must have been some challenges along the way. If it'd be interesting maybe to hear about those and perhaps how you overcame them.
Yeah, I think when we started talking about cultural intelligence, nobody knew about it. You know, in 2016, it was one of those things people were a bit like, what, CI? And I had to spend, you know, the biggest
No.
challenge was getting people to say CQ instead of CI. It's like, well, why is it CQ? And I think people were looking for almost the next thing, because there was a sense that, as I always say, with unconscious bias, it was a bit like, well, you know what, we're all unconsciously biased. Let's try not to consciously apply unconscious biases, which wasn't really working for anyone. Nita says, can I start from the beginning? I'm sorry, Nita.
Oh, sorry, I didn't spot that. I think
we'll cut it
you missed very
Please
much,
ask
Nita,
me some
because
questions at the end,
yeah.
Nita, if I've still got time, and I'll try and answer them. But yeah, so I think some of the challenges were around people not holding or grasping onto this as, okay, this is the next magic wand, you know, so let's all just go and do a CQ program, and hey presto, we're all going to be more inclusive. And I think that's been quite a battle, saying to people, no, listen, you know, CQ works for the inclusion agenda when it's aligned with intentional inclusive leadership, when it's aligned with change management principles, when it's aligned with value-driven leadership, which is how our model works. So I think that was a challenge, getting people to actually get past, okay, what is it? Is a new tool? Is it just a tick box thing? I think it was also a challenge to get people not just you know, wanting us to come in. I always say I don't work with organizations. There are two conditions I have in terms of working with any organization. One, I have to start with a board. If they don't let me start with the board, I just won't do it. And secondly, you know, one, you know, there's that whole thing. And secondly, I won't just go into an organization to deliver a single training program. But, you know, my focus is the inclusion agenda. So I think there's some situations in which that works for the CQ model. But because I'm working specifically on the inclusion agenda, I want people to travel a journey. And I think CQ is a beautiful journey. And actually, for anybody who wants to really begin to engage with the beauty of CQ, then you have to recognize that from the moment you take the assessment to your first engagement with it, everyone is a step. But you know, I've been doing this now for 6 years or nearly 7 years, and absolutely adore the model. But I wouldn't class myself as being culturally intelligent. I think what I would class myself as is being on that constant journey. And that's what's exciting about it, because it means when you go into a new situation or you meet a new set of people, you're automatically going through, okay, what do I know? What's my motivation here? And what do I know? What do I not know? Where are my assumptions? And okay, what's my strategy here? And how's that going to change the way I act in this situation? And I think we need to keep on our toes as leaders and when we engage with this.
So true. It's a never-ending journey, but hopefully a really enjoyable one. And then, I don't know, finally, before perhaps if we have any questions from the audience, I'd love to know, you know, people always want to know about outcomes. You know, what have you seen in terms of success? You know, what impact has it made as you've been kind of rolling out your programs?
That's you know, recently, and we've been doing this at Above Difference now for 4 years. And I would say, you know, that we're probably, in terms of being the oldest organization in the UK doing this, particularly focused on CQ. And I'm really impressed by the fact that we're now beginning to see organizations who've kept on the journey. And that's the challenge, who've stayed on the journey, who haven't done this as a tick box exercise. We're beginning to see them coming back and talking about the impact it's having. So we did a really wonderful pilot across 5 hospitals in Derbyshire, in the Derbyshire region. And we were looking specifically at how you use the cultural intelligence tool alongside intentional inclusive leadership to change the way that they recruit and promote. And what, at the time we started, they really were committed to changing. And what was happening was when they were sending out adverts, they were barely getting anybody applying from Black and minority ethnic communities. They've recently seen a 40% increase in the numbers of people who are applying for from those communities who are applying for their jobs. And what's happened, what we've done is used a cultural intelligence lens to look at the way they draft their recruitment, you know, adverts, the way the whole sort of recruitment process. We walked through it sort of stage by stage, and they were great because they sort of got to a point where they're just like, listen, we need to make changes. We need to, you know, to start again. And that innovation, I think, has been really key. But, you know, there's stories. I love the story of the police officers who, the police officers who had done the program, again, the Leading Inclusively with Cultural Intelligence program. and this senior white police officer who had some guys on his team who were Muslim, who were in the middle of Ramadan, and because he had deliberately built his knowledge around this, he, you know, I was told of the story where he deliberately sends out a team to go and relieve the guys who are on Ramadan at the time of iftar, so they could step away from what they were doing and pray and break their fast. And that's an officer using his cultural intelligence with a faith that's not his to really create a sense of belonging for people. And those are the kind of stories that, you know, for me, just, you know, or recently heard a story of someone who was managing a network where they had a woman there who wasn't feeling as comfortable, you know, expressing herself in the company of men from her community. And what they did was, instead of trying to raise her confidence, they recognized the fact that they needed to create a separate space to engage with her until she felt more comfortable doing that. And so when those kind of stories come back to me, of people who've been through, of leaders in particular, who are making changes in the way they lead, that's what sort of, yeah, that's what gets me up in the morning.
Yeah, totally. That's what makes it all worth it. They're just like really heartwarming stories, completely. I don't know whether we've got a couple more minutes. I don't know whether we've got any questions from the audience at all. It would be lovely to hear from people if they'd like to ask Jennifer anything. I was just wondering, I suppose a question from me is, you know, what's your sort of highlight? Is I love the story of the you know, the policeman who was being so inclusive to his Muslim colleagues, but I don't know if you've got any other highlights to share with us.
Oh gosh, yeah, they're just, you know, there's so many that you hear. You know, I love the leader, for instance, who, having done this program, went back and you know, and sat down with a member of her team who was who again of a different ethnicity. And I always say to people, we talk about difference. We never go into an organization and focus on one protected characteristics, because I'm a firm believer that inclusion it either works for everyone or it doesn't work for anyone, you know. And this particular leader went in and she'd been leading someone who she'd not quite understood for quite a while, and asked the question, what does it feel like to be a woman of color? And this leader was a white woman, you know, and what does it feel like to be led by me? And she said that was one of the most powerful conversations she'd ever had. And incidentally, I had the person she was leading, who came to a course after that, who said, listen, you know, my manager came back from this course and for the first time sat down with me and really heard and listened to me. And those kind of changes, I think, are the things that we've got to see. And one of the things I'm really keen on with the model that we work on is moving from, once people get that model, to then how do you lead and manage change? And how do you do that in a culturally intelligent way? And actually identifying the cultures within your organization and being culturally intelligent with them in terms of how.
Oh, I think we may have lost you, Jennifer. Oh, what a shame, right at the very, very end. I think, oh, I just would love you to be able to say goodbye. Oh, Jennifer, I lost you briefly again. I think we've reached the end of our time, and I'm sorry, because I don't know if you want to just finish your sentence of what you were saying.
Yeah, so I don't know where you lost me, but I was just saying about the importance of using the cultural intelligence to manage change effectively. Because actually, even if we start looking and leading in a culturally intelligent way, we have to change the organizations and spaces in which we work. And I want to end with one of my favorite quotes by George Day. And he says, inclusion isn't about bringing people into the existing spaces, but it's about creating new spaces together where everyone feels they belong. And I think the more culturally intelligent those spaces are, the more that we can ensure that everybody feels that they've got a place and do belong and are valued and recognized for who they are.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's a lovely place to stand to end, and I 100% agree. We've got one comment here from, I think it's a comment rather than a question, from Tanya Finney. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jennifer, we've met pre-COVID.
No, I can't
she says, Jennifer, we've met pre-COVID in London at a CQ summit. I've quoted some of your training with the police since then a few times in keynotes with referencing your name, of course. Such a powerful initiative.
Thank you so much, Tanya.
Yeah,
we did read. Great to catch up again.
And also just a question here from Nita, is the assessment for the whole organization or just the board?
Well, I always start off with the board. I think, many of the organizations I work with have thousands of employees, and I'm not sure that just rolling the assessment out randomly across an organization and that it depends on what you're trying to achieve, achieves change. So I start with the board, I start with the senior leaders, and then of course we're fortunate enough to be able to accredit facilitators in organizations, and they then go on and roll it out. But I think, obviously the assessment is such a powerful part of the tool, but often organizations are making decisions about how and when they roll it out across thousands of employees.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm afraid that's definitely all we've got time for now, despite some of the disruption with the connection. But thank you so much for joining us. It's been really wonderful hearing from you and talking to you.
Thank you so much, Polly, and well done again to the three of you for putting this on. I think it's
Thank you.
Well, that was magic, wasn't it? The wonderful Polly and Jennifer off, and I'm back on stage. What an amazing conversation. So impactful, so powerful. But that's Jennifer. That's how she is, impactful and inspirational. Now, my panel, which I'm just so grateful and thankful and appreciative of, the three panelists that I have in our conversation around cultural intelligence and leadership. So I've got the wonderful, who's coming onto the stage first? Chris Williams, Global Head of DEI at CBRE. Sophia Hussain, the Global Head of DEI at Wunderman Thompson. And Dylan Shimon, who is the Experiential Learning Coordinator at Equality Leaders. Is that right, Dylan? Sorry, I hope I got that right. What a wonderful panel. And I was just saying that this is going to be magic, and I hope we can make this magic unfold in many ways for you, not just during this conversation, but after. Before I move over to the panelists for proper introduction, here's another quote that I want to say from the book before I ask my first question, which is, John Kaganga says, talking about your work is one thing, but telling the story of why you do the work opens you up to such a deeper level of connection and understanding. And that's what this panel is about. So my first question really, and I would love for the panelists to introduce themselves as they answer this question. Chris, happy for you to go first, is tell us a bit about yourself, your backstory, your why.
Yeah, so, I've already been introduced as Chris Williams. I'm the Global Director for D&I at CBRE, and I tell people that stands for Chris Brings Real Energy. So if I get a bit excited, forgive me on this call, but, I'm in this D&I space. And when I reflect on my whole journey, 40 years ago, actually, I'm showing my age. 40 years ago, the family got a phone call to say my brother had been stabbed multiple times in his back. And that was just because he was walking down the street with a white lady. And it made me, 8 years old, so I'm definitely telling you my age, it made me kind of think, why did somebody stab him just because of who he was with? And my family had to really explain to me that you can be treated differently just because of the way you look. Not the content of your heart or how you communicate or anything, just the way you look. And I really reflected and felt I've been on this D&I journey since then, just trying to always back the underdog and trying to understand people's differences. And rather than let that be something that pushes me away from people, let that be something that attracts me to people, and be inquisitive and learn more about individuals. So that's really why I do what I do. I want to fight the underdog. I've always been the person who would, when I was younger, I would beat up the bully. I'm not the bully, but I would beat up the bully. And now I don't beat them up anymore. But I challenge their beliefs and also challenge my own at times as well. So that's just a little bit about me, and I look forward to sharing a bit more about me as a person as we continue the dialogue.
talk about powerful and sharing with vulnerability. Thank you, Chris. That was I didn't know that, and that can be, gosh, at the age of 8, the power, the impact of that on an 8-year-old, and trying to get your head around the unfairness of the world for those that look like the way we do. Dylan, tell us a bit about yourself, your story, and your why.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Dylan. My pronouns are he, she, and I self-identify as a white South African gender fluid gay man, obviously an immigrant living here in London. And yeah, I spent my childhood growing up in South Africa and Botswana. I trained as a cultural anthropologist at university, came over to London about 14 years ago, fell into a very long 12-year love affair with aviation. And when the pandemic came around or hit the world, I lost my job, but that's okay because it actually gave me that opportunity to, take stock of where I was and better understand what it is I wanted to do, because I felt for many, many years I actually hadn't woken up each morning and felt as though I had purpose or even that deep sense of community or belonging. So I started upskilling, learning, studying, taking a number of courses, found the DE&I space and an incredible community of practitioners where I really did start cultivating that sense of community. And in many ways, that's why I do what I do now, is because of that community and that belonging that I felt and that the community have given me. And that's something, that I believe everybody should have access to. And I do it because it's very much aligned with my own personal values, which I, a good few years ago realized I need to do work. I need to do that self-work and understand what my own values are, because if people ask me, Dylan, what are your core values? I wouldn't have been able to have told them even 3 years ago, right? But I also want to just briefly say that, I also, having taken this journey and continuing this lifelong learning journey, I've also recognized the privilege. I have access to so much privilege, particularly my whiteness, right? And so I approach my work that I do now every day with that awareness that my whiteness offers me so much privilege, together with the fact that I'm a man, right? And I'm wanting to engage and challenge and disrupt people and spaces, because I believe that's where I can actually make the most impact. So yeah, that's a little bit about me in a 30-second blurb.
Thank you, Dylan. And we haven't even touched the surface upon what it was like to grow up in South Africa as a great gay man, gay person, and, your interactions with Black people in South Africa and what that was like. I mean, there's a whole level of story there. But also, I think we all have privilege, all of us, and identifying that privilege and using that, which is what the power within the DEI work and the world belongs and stays. So without further ado, the last but not the least, Sophia, tell us your story.
Thank you, Ritika. Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia Hussain. I'm the Inclusion, Equity and Diversity Director at Wunderman Thompson. And I guess a bit about my story is, my biggest aha moment in my journey is when I knew what I didn't want to be, rather than knowing what I wanted to be. I realized I had to build myself around my core values, which Dylan touched on, or rather my code of leading with integrity. I recognized that was really important to me. And we've spoken about this, Ritika. I'm very much based around who am I when no one is looking. And that's when my start of my journey of self-growth, of development, both professionally and personally, essentially we're one person. And it's important to have that connectivity and alignment between the two spaces that, we exist in. I'd say this was starting point in knowing, what motivated me or, what got me out of bed. It was very much embedded in amplifying the experience of the underrepresented and marginalized groups. And that's how I entered the world of DE&I, inclusion, equity, and diversity. And it's almost, that's when my story actually started, because prior to that, you know, I had a great career, I had a great job, I was doing well. But stepping into my power, it really happened. And where I, you know, where I truly felt I belonged was in that core principle and value of how is it I use my privilege and access my privilege to lift others as I continue to rise.
Wow, Sophia, we've got Sarah from the audience saying, powerful statement. Who am I when no one's looking? And God knows that everyone on this panel is, integrity absolutely stands to the top, because that's, there's no other way when you want to do this work. Integrity is what, and the values is what should lead us. Sophia, I'm so interested in, obviously, your identities as a woman who wears a hijab, as a woman who operates in these spaces. What's that like from a personal level, and how that impacts what you do at a personal level for shaping the future of the world. So thank you. That was, that's just amazing. Thank you. That leads me to Chris, what brought you to CQ then? I mean, why do you feel that you need to add cultural intelligence to your already phenomenal toolbox?
Yeah, and I kind of really prided myself on EQ, right? Emotional intelligence, and I'm a person of faith and I'm a spiritual person, and I really kind of leverage that in just reading people's emotions, and kind of people always credit me with being able to speak to how they're feeling when they haven't even told me, and I really utilized EQ for that. And a lovely person called Sunina Kohli kind of spoke to me about this subject and said, I've got somebody I'd love you to meet called Ritika, and she can really talk to you about CQ. And the rest is history. I met up with you and you really kind of explained it. And I was like, well, where have you been all my life? What's happened? Why have I only suddenly heard about this now? And I do a global role. I'm trying to move the needle for 68,000 employees across CBRE in over 100 countries. That has its challenges culturally, and there's all different things in that melting pot. And for me, CQ, I could not do the role that I'm doing now without CQ, and being able to take that as an input that would influence the way that I operate, the way that I talk to people, the way that I receive information. So to me, it's a necessity in my toolbox. It's not even an option anymore for me. It's just so necessary.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. And thanks for mentioning Sunena. She's such a powerhouse. And I'm so grateful for bringing us together. But equally, absolutely, as you said, I was I was in Toronto recently, and then Washington over the last couple of weeks. And I'm not being funny, driving to the airport, and both with CBRE right outside the airport, big, huge sign. And of course, I thought of you, and I thought, it is a global company, and the challenges that come with not just the various facets of our culture that we have to work with, whether that's gender, whether that's race, whether that's faith, whether that's sexual orientation. Then there's the cultural values and norms of each country. Do you take your shoes off when you enter somebody's house in India? Or, how do you work with people, not stereotyping them as Chinese or Indian or Japanese, but just that extra understanding of how cultures can operate from a purely nationality perspective. So thank you for bringing that into the mix, Chris. Dylan, you are a CQ certified facilitator, and I hear you're doing an absolute wonderful job of spreading the wisdom. Tell us what got you to CQ and how it's going.
Thank you. And I guess my journey to CQ, of course, is very, very different to that of Chris's and Sophia's, in the sense that, as I mentioned, I spent 12 years in aviation, right, building my career. So that meant that every day I was working with international teams, and I was physically crossing international borders, right? So it was a wonderful career to be in, because it gave me that opportunity to live abroad in Hungary, Germany, Spain. I had that opportunity, right, to grow those communities of friends in each of those places. But I also had to learn very quickly how to navigate those different social interaction norms, the different customs. It's an entirely different way of navigating the world, and I had to adapt very, very fast. And then, of course, because that was all I knew in terms of career and aviation, when my role was made redundant, I really was at a loss, because this meant that it was a radical career change. It was a radical change in my own circumstances, and the fact that I lost my apartment, my employment, my fiance, and I won't go down that tragic route. But to answer your question, Ritika, I actually found my way to CQ because it gave me the opportunity to really translate my skill set into a transferable form that actually communicated or demonstrated my value add to those outside of aviation. So for me, CQ was that answer, it was that enabler. It really opened my eyes to the fact that, hey, look, yes, you have spent 12 years in aviation, but you have an invaluable skill set and you have something to offer and a value add. And so it also gave me that confidence boost and that self-belief that actually I could do something entirely different, something that is aligned to my values and my purpose, right? So CQ really stepped in when I needed the most, and for that I'm incredibly grateful.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Dylan. And you are embodying CQ in so many ways, not just because of your own experience personally, but for the work that you do in this space. So thank you for sharing that. Sophia, I am so intrigued to hear about your journey into CQ and what that means for you.
So I think for me, it's one of those learnings. Once you develop your muscle in, it simply makes sense. We increasingly work in a borderless world. This means making meaningful connections with people, regardless of where they're sat. And it's important than ever before to go above and beyond to ensure that we are continuing to show relevancy by having those conversations and creating spaces where everyone feels, they are being fully seen, regardless of the cultural nuances. And I think CQ gives the ability to better understand not just the cultural nuances, but also how we base our interactions as a consequence and how we fluctuate our behavior. I mean, a simple handshake, for instance, it's a way of a quick greeting in the UK. Yet, if you are somebody who's working in the Middle East, it's not culturally acceptable for a man and a woman to shake their hands. You reference wearing the headscarf. For me, it showcases that I'm a woman of faith who's practicing, a Muslim woman, but yet in the Western world, it's seen as a sign of oppression. So it's about recognizing those differences and the value in those differences and how we come up with our preconceived notions, prejudice, and being open to learning. And I believe it's in those, yet they seem simple, but when we invest in our understanding and when we act upon these, it can have a huge positive impact. And more than anything, it's about these effective fluctuating our communication style depending on the cultural differences. It can truly enhance and enrich those relationships, both in the business world, with our employees, with our clients, but also as we travel the world and we embrace diversity. I think it's really important that we step into and embrace cultural intelligence as an everyday principle as opposed to an add-on.
You've actually articulated the entire framework beautifully, Sophia, in giving those examples. We were at a conference yesterday where someone showed some statistics around England and Wales being 94% white in 1991. And right now it stands at 81% white. So look at the way the world is really shifting. It's there for everyone to see. And this is England and Wales. I mean, London statistics could be completely different from there. So the world is changing. It's multicultural. There's borderless, as you mentioned, Sophia. There's so much more to it. Everyone, the most potent observation that I've seen sort of in every conference and event and discussion is Gen Z, and around what is their expectation when they come into the workplace. It isn't anymore about, oh, our policy says that we are inclusive. It's what does the leadership team look like? What does the talent pipeline look like? What is the bonus structures in place? They are asking. I have been in rooms with the, 16 to 18-year-olds that will not fear getting up and asking those questions or challenging, and equally asking for that accountability with a level of confidence that I surely didn't have when I was 18. And that gives me so much hope for what the future would look like, but equally how much cultural intelligence is needed, because the generational differences, people are working for longer, and you've got the next generations coming in starting to work. So how are you going to bridge that gap? Thank you everyone for that.
Ritika, just on that, right? I feel like even when I look at my 11-year-old and 13-year-old daughters, they just seem to be so culturally aware compared to their parents, because they're going to schools where they're learning from other kids straight away. And as you said, if the stats were saying 90, whatever it was, percent, however many years ago when we were at school, we didn't have too many people to learn from a different culture's perspective. Whereas the children nowadays, the Gen Z and those before, or sorry, those after, they're in a real melting pot in their schools where my kids are coming and teaching me stuff. They're telling me how it goes. And yeah, I think that's worth recognition as well.
It's sure. I mean, this is amazing that I would fumble using the word, using they, them for someone. But someone, my 11-year-old has never fumbled with one of her friends who identifies as, pronouns as they, them. She never fumbles. It's just a given. It's almost as if, how could it not be? That's what they want to be called as, and that's what we do. It's just the whole natural. Dylan, you want to say something to that?
No, I just was going to say, I think also the fact that, Gen Z and generations to come, they are the true digital natives here, aren't they? In the sense that they've always grown up with access to the internet. And so that adds an entirely different dimension to what Sophia mentioned in terms of borderless. We are really living in a borderless world. The younger generations are just connected, plugged into the rest of the world, right? And so there's that wonderful cross-pollination and learning, et cetera, and that breaking down almost of a lot of cultural barriers that, our previous generations would have faced.
And that's absolutely right, Dylan. So I want to actually, I'm deviating a little bit, but I featured in a podcast recently on CQ, and this 60+ white, straight, extreme, privileged man, he asked me, he said, Ritika, in one sentence, can you tell me why should I bother with this CQ stuff? Tell me in one sentence, why should someone like me care? And this is, of course, the whole, why should you care about DEI either, but why should you care about CQ? And, as much as we have done the research, and I've been talking about CQ for 2 years, I was like, oh my God, in one sentence, because I can list a whole page of outcomes that would come out of it. And then, I reached out to Dave, and Dave said, the proof is in the pudding, the title of my book. If you want to be effective in a diverse, digital, and divided world, you need CQ. Mm-hmm. So that's the whole diversity, the digitalization that you're talking about, Dylan. And the fact that it is a polarized world, and, look at politics around us and look at how the world is shaping of right and wrong and left and right. So we've completely deviated. I would absolutely love to have some questions for the audience. We've got 5 minutes.
Just for me, when you made me think there about the one sentence, and for me, it's about, how important it is to understand the needs and preferences of individuals, and for people to. That's it for me in a sentence. It's about understanding the needs and preferences of individuals, which CQ needs to be factored in. We can't just assume, that we can invite your team to a pub for a dinner, and here's a set menu, and this, you haven't even factored in the environment and the preferences of your different colleagues. For me, it's just a must. You need to be aware of the needs and preferences of everybody that you encounter.
Absolutely, Chris. And thanks for saying that. Sophia, I would love to get your key takeaway and
Yeah,
launch
I got
something.
me thinking as well, and I instantly came to me. It's the only way to stay relevant.
Yeah.
It's the only way to
Mhm.
stay relevant. And that for me is, I think, enough. We all want to stay
Mic
relevant.
drop. Mic drop. No one said a word.
Oh, I love it. Can we do mic drop and record it? Because my kids always say I use the mic drop moment completely wrong. So I'm like, feel very
You know what?
privileged right
I'll
now.
send you a WhatsApp message saying, Sophia, you said this and it was mic drop.
And I'm going to forward it to my kids who think I'm totally uncool.
Boom.
So this is
Yeah.
good.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you, Sophia. Dylan, can you better that?
I mean, I can't. I really can't. So I'm just going to kind of add to that. And I'd say, the most incredibly powerful thing that I still to this day get from CQ and being out there and, telling people about CQ is that it really does for me center around that cultivation of that self-awareness, right? Taking that time to self-reflect and self-examine, doing that self-work, right? Which does make us better, more inclusive leaders, does give us that opportunity and that capability to relate to one another in the ways that people need us to. So that for me has always been, kind of my North Star when it comes to the CQ world.
The key word there, your mic drop word, is the way they need us to. Because very often our understanding of what trust and respect and integrity and values and all of that looks like might be very different for someone else. So it's that whole, how do we need to flex and adapt without compromising on our values, of course, because that's the core of who we are. But how do we need to flex and adapt to make that impact, to make the change, to get to the whole? And this is what I referred to earlier on, heart-led, head-led leaders. How do we, all we care about really is impact. So how do we get to that impact? And it's that CQ framework and model that can help us flex and adapt. So, with 1 minute to go, I think, Emily says, treat others as they would like to be treated. Absolutely. It's such a wonderful panel. Thank you so much, Sophia, Dylan, and Chris. I've walked away with some nuggets of absolute wisdom on this one, and grateful for your time, for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your impact in the world with us. And with that, I just want to sort of also go into the logistics. We've all got a 10-minute break now, so everyone online listening in, it's a 10-minute break now, and we're going to come back in at 4:25. So don't go away. Go and have a glass of water, do whatever you need to do, and then we will see you back in 10 minutes. Sorry, 2:25. What did I say? Did I say 120? I don't know. Anyway, 2:25. This is obviously my math's not working. Yeah, please be back. Emily's put me into my box. Please be back at 2:25, everybody. Thank you to my panelists, and hope you're wishing you a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Hope you managed to make a cup of tea, or perhaps Tanya, it's 9:25 where you are. Maybe it's something more exciting than that. Anyway, welcome back, everybody. I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Jenny Garrett, who's going to be joining me on stage any minute. Jenny, thank you so much for coming. I'm just going to introduce you a little bit for everybody, and then it's going to be over to you. So Jenny Garrett, OBE, is an award-winning career coach and leadership trainer with nearly 2 decades of experience of running a global business. Jenny empowers people to make transformation happen. That might be navigating a career successfully, finding purposeful work, or getting the best from their team. Jenny, everything you do is aimed at either advancing gender balance, creating inclusive workplaces, or equipping young people with the skills that leaders of the future need. You're known for your talks, your books, and I know we're going to be talking about your latest one in a minute, your career coaching, leadership training. You're a regular media commentator, You also facilitate retreats and run conferences for teens. So it sounds like you're incredibly busy. So we're really grateful to you for finding the time to join us today. And I'm going to stop talking. I'd love to find more about, what brought you here, and what led you to do all this great work.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that lovely introduction and the opportunity to be here. Really excited. Where do we start? It's always a question, isn't it, when we're talking about ourselves? I think because I'm speaking for the CQ Centre and all the work you do, I should start with my heritage. So my parents are from the Caribbean, my mum from St. Lucia and my dad from Jamaica, a tiny island and a much bigger island. They both came here when they were sort of in their early teens because their parents wanted a better life for them and had come to create a better life for themselves. Really, in terms of our life, we know that people from the Caribbean, people who have Black heritage, it was quite difficult in the early days to really get the opportunities that we do have now, even though there's still a lot of work to be done. My mum, when I was a teenager, became a teacher. And that was a real inspiration to me, that she did a degree in her 30s and inspired my brother and I then to study ourselves. So I didn't have a traditional route. I studied in the evening while working full time. It took me 5 years to get my first degree, and I've gone on to get a master's since then. In terms of my work, I worked in sort of administration jobs, retail jobs, and then went into marketing. And marketing was my love. It was the career that I thought that I would always do. But in my last role, I worked for a leading business school, and it was there that a colleague who's now a really good friend said to me, "Where next? Where are you going in your career?" And I thought, I'm here, I'm doing it. And she said, "I think you could train people in marketing, or perhaps you might think about coaching. People come into your office, they come away motivated and with action. Maybe that's the thing you should do." I was a very nervous public speaker at that point. So the idea of public speaking was just no way. In terms of coaching, I was curious. I've always been a person who's curious to learn new things. So the organization supported and sponsored me to attend a coaching program at Lancaster University. And I found it personally and professionally transformational. Interestingly, the reason I got that opportunity was because at that point, they wanted diversity in coaching. That's, nearly 20 years ago now. Organizations were forward thinking enough to try and diversify the field of coaching, but not a lot has been done. And, we haven't moved forward in huge strides, but it was a wonderful opportunity for me. And I went back to my job and said, "I want to be a coach. I don't want to be a marketer." And they said, "You've been employed to be a marketer. We'll let you coach a little bit on our programs, but it's not your full-time job." And so I felt a bit frustrated, a little bit stuck, didn't know what to do, got some coaching myself. And my coach suggested I go down to 4 days a week. And on the 5th day, see if I really do like this coaching thing, see if I'm really made for that. And I'd want to be freelance and all that's entailed in running your own business. So I set myself a target financially that I would have to earn to take the leap. Within a year, I was freelance. And that's 17 to 18 years ago now. My business has grown and developed. When I first started, it was one-to-one coaching on leadership programs. Then I completed my master's in management, learning and leadership, and started to create my own leadership programs. And then I wrote a book, Rocking Your Role, which was a guide to success for female breadwinners. And I started doing lots of work with women, coaching women, running leadership programs in corporate organizations for women, and as you know, running retreats for women. But I'd often look out on these audiences of women, and fabulous women, bright women, ambitious women, with the challenges of juggling, caring with life, as often women have. But I would rarely see someone who looked like me, someone from my background. And I was disappointed in that, thinking, where are they? Why are they not getting into these rooms? They need this just as much, if not more, as others. And so started doing a lot of work around actually thinking about those from ethnically diverse backgrounds and what they need to break through the glass ceiling. Women need it, but everyone from a minoritized background needs it. So I started devising programs to really support people to break through that glass ceiling. And a lot of the work we do now is with huge companies, FTSE 250 companies, taking cohorts of their staff from ethnically diverse backgrounds, their managers and sponsors through our programs to really advance inclusion in organizations and advance representation. So that's a lot of our work. And as you said, I recently wrote my second book, Equality versus Equity, tackling issues of race in the workplace. Alongside that, I have my social enterprise, Rocking Your Teens. About, I think it's 8 years ago now, my daughter was in secondary school, and I hope you can see she's got a very empowered mum who was sort of always encouraging. But even with an empowered parents and supportive parents, if she was struggling with all the social media pressure, the sort of, dumbing yourself down to fit in with the cool kids, all of that stuff. And I just thought, what am I going to do to support her? When I started researching, I saw that, this is a pandemic actually before that, the pandemic that we had, which was, so many young women are experiencing so much and they need support. And I thought, well, instead of just supporting my one child, why don't I do something for this, this group of young women who need support? So I was going into a corporate client, and I said, just on the offhand, I'm going to create this event conference for young girls to inspire them. And he was really interested. He said, tell me more, send me a one-pager. So I quickly put a one-pager together, and he said, let's go into partnership with this social enterprise, and let's support boys too. So 8 years later, we've taken thousands of young people through our event.
Amazing.
We've inspired them, helped them increase their aspirations, and also really help them think about how they make good choices as well, and work on their mental health. That's a passion project, not a business as such. We don't make a penny from it, but we are so pleased with some of the partners we have. We have Kurt Geiger as a partner at the moment. NatWest hosted our last girls conference. 250 girls from all over the country attended that. So that's my, one of my passions. And I think what I do probably is see the problems that exist in the world that affect me, and think, if I'm going to help myself, why don't I help some other people at the same time? And the last bit, and I will stop talking. I'll let you.
No. I'm loving listening to you, and I'm sure everyone else is too. So don't worry about that.
Is that actually probably 2019? I was contacted on LinkedIn by someone who was on the board of a coaching company, who said to me, I'm on the board of this coaching company. They don't have any coaches from diverse backgrounds. They said, coaches don't exist from diverse backgrounds. But I found you. Are you the only one, or are there others? He said, could you speak to this person? So it was really interesting. They did actually know me, but they specialized in maternity coaching, sort of returning from maternity coaching, and knew that wasn't, what my passion was. And so I said, yes, there are lots of people from diverse backgrounds who are great coaches, highly qualified and doing fantastic work. I'll get you some CVs. So within a week, I'd got her 15 CVs. And I think she took 2 of those coaches onto her books. And it made me realize that we needed to increase the visibility of coaches from diverse backgrounds. And so I started pulling people together and telling them that I was going to create a directory. And then COVID happened, and I sort of put it on hold, because I thought, we could have a lovely face-to-face event. COVID will only last 3 months.
Yes.
That happened. And the coaches who I had approached said to me, you know what, let's, just put it out there, because it's much needed after the killing of George Floyd. And so I did. And that's sort of the third string to my bow, which is a wonderful directory of coaches who are highly qualified, highly experienced, who we've all vetted, who we showcase really to show that coaches from diverse backgrounds exist. They can make a huge difference in organizations. Number one, offering people from ethnically diverse backgrounds a choice of people who have a similar lived experience. But also, we know at the top of organizations in the UK, there aren't many people from diverse backgrounds, and voices and opinions and perspectives are not getting into those senior echelons. So actually having a coach from a diverse background, a different background to yourself, can be another way to challenge your thinking. So I'm really proud of the Diverse Coach Directory and all the amazing coaches on it. They're a tribe of people, and we meet quarterly and exchange ideas and support each other. Yeah, so that's the kind of work I do.
Well, thank you for that. And yeah, it sounds like the directory certainly was much needed, a really useful resource for people, because you're absolutely right. There's much to be gained from having a coach that's from a different background to you in lots of ways. And before we get on to talking specifically about what brought you to CQ, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you fitted in writing the book, the new book, and what that's all about, equality versus equity. Tell us a bit about it. Why should I read it?
Okay. Yeah, just to say, in a way, the book chose me. What happened was I was delivering a talk, and I was talking about the difference between equality and equity. And amazingly, an editor was on the for a leading publisher was there for Emerald. I'll say Emerald because that's who published my book. And they said, "I think this is a great concept. We want you to write a book. Put a proposal together." So it kind of chose me. They thought it was great. It was something that I already talked about and something that I thought was really important. So I'm so proud to have completed it. It's a small book. So they gave me only 7 months to write it. And so it was a very short space of time, but they only asked me to write 40,000 words. So it was doable. When I wrote my first book, I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning every day and wrote from 5 till 7. And I had an amazing book coach. This time I didn't have a book coach. And for some reason, I didn't have the same discipline to be able to do that. So what I actually did was took time off. My daughter's at uni in Dundee. I hired a B&B in Dundee and sort of blocked out some time a few times, just blocked out that time and just wrote and wrote, met her for dinner and then wrote and wrote. And that's how I managed to get it done this time. So I don't know why I couldn't do my disciplined 5 till 7 this time. I just had to do it a different way. Why should people read it? This book is really for people who are leaders in organizations and are struggling with this understanding race and ethnicity and how to get the best of people. Maybe they were told when they were younger, you shouldn't mention race or ethnicity. That's really rude. And now they're being told to mention it and bring it to the table and treat people differently. And it maybe goes against everything that they've ever been taught. And they're thinking, I'm going to have to create new pathways in my brain to get this, and I'm resistant to it, and I find it really challenging. I know I'm a good person, but this is really difficult for me. It helps you step into the shoes of people from ethnically diverse backgrounds in the UK, and I think the UK is a good part of it because so many of these sorts of books are written from a US perspective. So it helps you step into the shoes and think about what the work life experience might be like for your colleagues, but it also gives you really good strategies to help and support. So it's a really practical book with top tips, as opposed to, oh, this is the problems of society, you go and solve it. It's much more, actually, we know you're a good person, we know you're trying. Here are some understanding of the concepts, and here's some really practical things to do. And also for anyone who gets muddled with the language and finds that really difficult, there's a glossary at the back with all the terms and what they actually mean, which I think people are always searching for. So it's it demystifies, it unpacks, but it also gives practical tips. And it's nice and short, which I think is really helpful. If you listen to it on Audible, it's only about 4 hours long. We all do our walks or in the gym, or
a couple of long car journeys, maybe.
and you've got it. So
it sounds extremely useful. I know a lot of people feel that, the world of sort of diversity and inclusion is a bit of a minefield. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing and offending someone. So they make and it is a mistake, the mistake of not going there at all. And then, of course, the conversations that need to happen don't happen. So thank you for writing it. And I hope lots of people read it. And so what I'm really curious to know is how, what led you to CQ? You've already got so many kind of tools in your toolbox. How did you, I know you're a certified facilitator, and have you started to use CQ, what does it bring to the work that you do?
Yeah, a client brought it to my attention. So we have a global client whose head office is in the US, and they asked me about it. They said, "Do you know cultural intelligence? Do you do that?" And I said, "Oh no, I don't, but I want to look into it." And when I looked into the course, I thought, "Oh, that's really interesting. This will be," I think I told you right at the beginning, I have this love of learning. This will be really interesting for me. So whether I get to use it with that client or not, this will be a really interesting course. And the other thing was, it was online, and I could join the US version, so the timings all worked for me as well. So that was really good, and I met some really interesting people from across the world. So a client turned me onto it, but when I read about it, I thought this looks really interesting. In terms of how I've used it so far, is I've integrated it actually into some of our programs, and what we've done is people from ethnically diverse background have talked about their cultural values, and so have their managers or their leaders, and then come together to think about, how do we bridge? How do we understand each other, and how do we bridge the differences between us while also really appreciating what each other brings? So it's been a really strong connector for line managers and participants on our programs to have a language of conversation, talk about their differences in a really positive way, appreciate them, and then think about how they make a bridge so that they're both successful in what they want to achieve. So that's how we've used it so far. We've also recently, been getting more inquiries around delivering CQ in organizations as well. So it seems to be something that I think people in the UK are learning more about, interested in, and I'm really pleased that we're in a position to be able to support them.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the real advantages of CQ is the fact that it feels like it's a very inclusive way of dealing with inclusion and talking about inclusion, and it provides a common language, as you say, that people can refer to, that sort of acts as a kind of a sort of stabilizing factor in what could be potentially sort of emotional or triggering kind of conversations, I suppose.
I like to say no blame, no shame. There's no, oh my goodness, is someone going to accuse me of being biased, racist, etc. That's not where CQ comes from, which I love. It comes from a place of, actually, we're all different. Let's understand and appreciate those differences. Sometimes it's around where we started off in the world. Sometimes those differences are not about that, but at least it gives us a bit of understanding. So yeah, for me, I've integrated it, and I think it's a really wonderful addition to the programs we were running.
Well, I think we're coming up to the end of time, so I don't know if anybody has any
It does
questions.
say there is one question.
Oh, let me have a look. How can we apply to be on the coach directory? There we go.
I see. There are some quite robust rules in terms of, you must have been coaching for 3 years. You must have a coaching qualification that we ask for evidence of. We also ask for references, and you must be insured and belong to a coaching body. But if you go to, I think if you type in diverse executive coach directory, and maybe add my name to it, it should come up. I think it's diverse executive coach directory. It's a really long URL. Or just get in touch with me and I can pass the URL on to you. If you don't quite qualify yet, so if you've only been coaching for a couple of years, for example, we do have a WhatsApp group. So we kind of keep you part of the community, but unfortunately, we can't refer you to clients and add you to the directory yet. But when you are fully in that space, then you can be added. So either way, get in touch and we might be able to add you to our WhatsApp group.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and thank you very much for sharing your story with us all today.
It's wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity, and it's great to be part of the CQ community.
To have you. Right, well, I think now I hope I'm right in thinking it's time for our next panel. I think they're going to be joining me on stage now. First of all, Kat Parsons Kat, you made it. Sharon, is it Inko Taraya? I want to pronounce it correctly.
Taria.
Inko Taria. There you go. I'm glad I checked. Welcome, and Tim Hardy-Lennox. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know that Kat had to spirit from a live public speaking engagement to a room somewhere nearby to be able to speak. So thanks so much for that. We're going to be talking about, well, these illustrious speakers are going to be sharing their stories of CQ with me now, but we're going to be kind of reflecting on the importance of cultural intelligence in a team setting as well. So Sharon, would you like to introduce yourself? And we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about your story and why you're here today.
Oh my goodness. Well, hi everyone. I'm Sharon Inko Taria. My story. Well, at the moment, I run something called the Power of Staff Networks, which is quite a, shall we say, a boutique consultancy, which does exactly what it says on the tin. All about helping networks find their power and helping organisations understand how to get the most from that. In addition to that, I lead the campaign for Networks Day, which is coming up on the 10th of May. Not plugging it, but I'm plugging it. And and again, that's about celebrating the added value that networks bring to the organisation. And if I was to switch hats, I'm also a non-executive director for a hospital as well. But before all of that, I had a whole different life. I used to be in the civil service, working on some strange policies and wonderful policies as well. In Whitehall and various departments, and a lot of what I saw how not to be in an organisation, I learned from the service, but also I learned some great things that led me on the path I am on today. So I'm really all about helping people give themselves permission to find their voice, and to really be clear about what it is they want and realise their value in how they achieve that. So so I use my coaching skills to help them get there. But that's just a quick potted version of who I am.
Thank you. It's definitely helpful. And Tim, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hopefully that unmute button worked.
It did.
Hi, I'm Tim, or T Hardy-Lennox, he, she, they. My current passion is a book I've just finished writing called Bias Was a Genius. It looks at sort of the three areas of DEI: representation, immediate inclusion, and root cause systemic issues. And my why for this work is rooted in trauma. To look at me, I am a privileged white middle class man. To know me is to understand with that privilege also comes a lot of pain and disadvantage, cultural and personal context. And I used to say I was a victim, then I switched to survivor, and now I say thriver of various different forms of abuse and violence. I won't trigger your audience, but very problematic things happened in my youth, and the systems and processes which were meant to support me failed. They didn't realize that one size doesn't fit all. And so despite my privilege, I fell through the gaps and the safety net, which so many of us have fallen through. Years later, when I sort of hit my teens, I started to be able to shape and understand that context, which was, if I had to fight for the most basic level of support, where else were we failing? And what about those people that didn't have that privilege that I had to begin with? So it started to bring out an activist in me. And that became my why, which was about undoing, redoing, and educating systems, processes, and people to get it right. And in the last few years, my why has really shifted from being an activist to how can I sustain that activism in a business context to commercialize DEI, making it unaffordable not to do diversity and inclusion, making it a core part of the business. So that's a lot of who I am, a bit of my backstory and what my book's about. And part of the solutions in the DEI toolkit that, you know, I talk through and what I'm really passionate about, I really believe that cultural intelligence is a real enabler to that business transformation, moving from representation through to inclusion. There's a little stepping stone, which hopefully I'll touch on later.
Thank you, Tim. That's fascinating, and I love the thriver term that you've come up with. Definitely better than victim. Kat, do you want to tell us a bit about your backstory too?
Yes, so I'm Kat Parsons. I'm head of diversity, inclusion and belonging for ISS UK and Ireland. We're a facilities management company, and I very much fell into my career. My background is in environmental consultancy, very male-dominated industries. I was in that for 16 years, and in terms of, I think for me, the switch into the D&I space has been mostly because I think on reflection, was I bringing my authentic self to work? And the answer is absolutely not. And I don't know if you can see my lapel today. I've got the Lesbian Visibility flag on. So it's Lesbian Visibility Week this week. And I am part of the community. I'm gay. I'm a wonderful woman and 2 children. But would I say that at work? No, I absolutely wouldn't, because I felt it was detrimental to my career to bring that with me. I needed to get respect in that male-dominated industry. So I very much would shy away from that. It would be very business focused and not bring the rest of me into work. So as part of my role now, it's around that sort of psychological safety and being able to encourage people to bring themselves to work, because it's the best for that person in terms of them thriving, but equally it's absolutely the best for the business. So I have quite a wide range of activities actually on a daily basis. ISS is 30,000 people across the UK and Ireland, so that's a lot of people to make sure that they feel that safety and that inclusion and belonging in a business.
Thank you. You've all got such interesting and diverse reasons for being here, but ultimately it's all about wanting to empower people and be able to be authentic. So obviously there's much in common. So I'd love to know now if you could tell us a little bit about what brought you to CQ. Perhaps we could start with you, Tim, just to sort of switch up the order a little bit. Why were you attracted to it as a framework with the work you were already doing?
In a word, frustration. And that might sound strange to say. As a career DEI professional, I've seen literally hundreds of business cases for diversity and being analysed years later on for their impact. And that original intent never really matches. So I realised after a while, the list of reasons and individual context for that gap in achieving that business context can't just be explained away with, business reasons. And so part of the puzzle was missing. I just couldn't put my finger on it. And what made the shift for me was understanding actually that homogenous teams are more productive than diverse teams if those diverse teams aren't enabled with cultural intelligence, or to use perhaps a different way of putting it, people with a common background will communicate with a common language. They'll be a bit more efficient somehow. But if people with diverse experiences and differences in how they communicate are not provided with an opportunity and voice and opinion to dissent, alternative options free from repercussion, then that cognitive dissonance or diversity of thought that we're aiming for just doesn't come out. So it's about activating the wisdom of diverse experiences. Representation alone doesn't mean diversity of thought, and there was a missing link in the behaviors. So for me, CQ, it takes diversity from what I think traditionally can be seen as optics and moves it as a tool to enable safe cognitive dissonance, which can lead to inclusion. So it's a tool for me to unlock dynamic relationships, relational empathy, and business innovation, which ultimately helps us achieve that diversity of thought.
Thank you. Sharon, would you like to tell us your version of that question? What brought you to CQ?
Well, 2 things. Number one, a good friend of mine, and I'm sure you all know, Rob Neal, would go on and on about how fantastic CQ is. And that's, I was like, I've got to look into this because he keeps saying it's great. And I could see why he felt it was great, because once I started to look into it myself, I thought, oh, this kind of plugs some gaps that I've been, trying to do around the work that I do with networks. And I loved what you just said, Tim, just now about activating wisdom, so that, we've got that diversity of thought. Just because you've got a group of people who have a common background or a common experience, it doesn't mean that they're automatically going to bring a different type of thinking to the table. And for me, when I deal with networks, the reason why networks are so important is because there is this cognitive bias, there's this empathy gap that exists for some groups. If you're not with the in crowd, when you're going through a particular experience, those in the majority they struggle to find the empathy. And if we think about what's happened with Ukraine versus what happens with other parts of the world, that's a good demonstration of what was going on with the empathy gap. We empathize, or some people empathize with the Ukrainians because they look like them, but they don't empathize with anyone else going through a very similar experience because of the same reason: they don't look like them. And so when it comes to employee networks and employee resource groups, the reason why people band together, they come together for that support, is because they understand, they empathize with what they're going through. They understand what it's like not to feel that from colleagues. And I think what CQ does is it gives networks some tools to articulate that in a much better way, so that people can start to understand, well, if I want to be an ally for this group, this is the journey I need to go on. And even as network leaders themselves, they need to go on a bit of a journey, because a lot of them got that CQ drive. They really, they've got that interest, they want to go for it. But sometimes they lack a strategy, and sometimes they lack the knowledge that they need to really get things over the line. So when I began to really study this, I could see where immediately networks could do it. They're already doing a lot of the stuff, but I could also see, well, if they could just get hold of this bit and this bit, they could really take their network forward, in the hope, she says, that there will not be any need for the network to do what they do in the same way they do it. So it's really made me pause and think. I don't call myself a diversity inclusionist, but I've never worked in D&I per se. Do you know what I mean? I've just worked in something that's led me down this journey. But even going through the program, it really did make me think about, well, what are my values? Well, what do I know about this? And what do I know about that culture? So it's a good personal assessment and evaluation, if as well as helping you understand how to work with others in the workplace.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like, in a way, all roads lead to inclusion somehow, because if you're working with people, whether you come at it through DEI or whether you come at it through sort of helping people with a global challenge because they're working in an international team, or you're in HR in some other capacity, ultimately we're all interested in what makes people thrive, what gets in the way of them thriving, and it's and what do they need, and it's a sense of being able to be themselves, being able to be authentic, having some level of autonomy, being respected, and all of these things seem to be, just to me anyway, completely interconnected. So Kat, I know that you haven't actually done anything officially yet with CQ, but you're obviously interested, and maybe you could tell us how you were drawn to cultural intelligence and the framework.
Absolutely. So I think if I start in terms of when I actually took on the role of head of diversity inclusion, it's not a role that ISS had previously. It's something that everyone was doing off the side of their desk. So when the step was made to appoint someone, the CEO basically said to me to make everyone feel as uncomfortable as possible, which is sort of quite a weird sort of ask of someone in their new role. And I'm very much a people pleaser, and that was quite an uncomfortable thing for me myself to sort of get into my head. But what she meant by that was, people will naturally be drawn towards sort of their group of people. I set up some ERGs. There's 6 across the dimension of diversity, and people will naturally sort of crowd towards, where they feel comfortable. But the ask that I had of the business, and especially the senior leaders, was, yes, okay, join the one that you relate to, whether that be abilities, generations, gender balance, but actually go and sign up for one that you don't feel as comfortable with. And I'm not asking you to go and put your hand up and input into every single conversation that's happening, but just learn and listen to what's being said. And sort of very much picking up on what the others have said there, it's about, that respect before understanding. We're not asking you, and again, as a D&I professional for the last 18 months, officially, I am nowhere near knowing everything. So again, it's a learning curve for me. It's me showing my vulnerability to say, do you know, I don't actually understand this element, and allowing others to have the same space to say, do you know, I don't understand that either. And that's worked really well for me, that the senior leaders in the business are saying, right, we're going to enjoy our culture, race and ethnicity ERG, which is something that I set up probably about 6 months ago, and it had the biggest impact on the business. Everyone wanted to join it, mostly because, again, we hadn't had it before. But when you look at the demographic of that group, there's a lot of middle-aged white men who have joined that because they're like, well, how to become an ally of this group? And it's all very well, even our CEO said, you know, I know how, you know, I'm an ally, put your hand up, ally. But what does that actually mean? And it's giving people that space to actually listen to those conversations. And again, not just talking the talk. So what's quite nice is next week we do sort of brunch events with our CEO and our C-suite. And we invite sort of 30 to 40 people from around the business to come and have that sort of one-to-one chat and challenge those senior leaders in the business. And it's worked for other of our ERGs as well, where we've been talking about our parental policy and the effect of people in our business when they come back to work after having children. Is that support there? Well, the evidence is no, there wasn't. So we've got one next week to talk about, you know, culture, race and ethnicity, and to actually challenge our C-suite to say, right, this is how our business feels. You need to hear this firsthand so we can make changes in the business.
It's fantastic you created these opportunities for people to basically hear other perspectives, because that's what it's all about. Half the time you don't realize what you're missing. It's just the blind spots, isn't it? Thank you. So, yeah, I wonder whether, Sharon, you can let us know, you know, how does CQ provide on a personal level, you know, the language for you in terms of how you experience cultural differences?
Yeah, I mean, when I did the training, you don't know what you don't know. Fine, let's put that out there. But I thought I knew some stuff, and then I go on this training, I just realize, crikey, I'm just a bit. I don't know, Jack. I need to do some studying. So I think, if anything, I liked what Kat was saying about, you know, education. There is a degree of education that goes on, and so that was a lot for me, and it's quite humbling experience. So, but what it did do is help me to understand why I subscribe to certain things and not others, because you just do stuff, but you don't know why you're doing it. You don't know if it's because it's what your parents told you should do, or your friends do that, or it's just a fan. You don't know. I didn't know about, you know, high distance and low distance and all that kind of stuff that you learn. I knew I was partial to one, but I didn't understand why. And so it helps me to begin to unravel some things, give myself permission to accept that there's some things that I am, you know, leaning towards, and then put that as part of my story. Do you see what I mean? Because sometimes we skip. I know I do. I skip parts of my story because I'm not quite sure how to articulate why I do that in the way I do. But what happens is you get to learn some things, and you're thinking, oh, I had a lot of those moments. Oh, I see. But I had a lot of penny drops that was really quite exciting, because I could then explain why I do things in a certain way or why I behave in a certain way. And I think a lot of reasons why, when the previous speaker was talking, she talked about a glossary because people don't know what terms to use because they don't want to offend anybody. But once you have the language, once you can articulate what something is, it gives you confidence to talk about it even more. And I think that's what CQ did for me, gave me confidence and a language to help articulate some of the things I do in the way I do it, and then help others to do the same. Have I answered the question? I don't know if I have.
Yeah, you totally have. No, I'm just thinking, you know, I thought I might just clarify, because I'm not sure if I said before. So you've done our you are now a certified facilitator, which means you are trained to debrief our cultural intelligence assessments to others. Is that right? You did the level 1. I'm just
yes. I'm sorry. No wonder people think, what's she talking about?
No, I just suddenly thought maybe for people who aren't listening. So what you've done is you've trained up to be able to talk about cultural intelligence, train others in cultural intelligence, essentially.
Absolutely. And I'd probably have to I'd go over it again before I would dare speak about it in such a public space, because I think you really do need to know, you really like, okay, this is really deep stuff. And every time you read something else, and there's layers and layers. So it's a great way of just learning about yourself. And I think we should all do it every so often, because we do change, we do evolve, experiences, you know, help influence us. So I think it's a great all-rounder tool, to be honest with you. So yeah, that's
Thank
just
you.
been my journey thus far.
Thank you. And what about you, Tim? I'll reiterate
Yeah.
the question if you need me to. It was just about how CQ gives you a language.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what it does. It's the language and the framework to articulate things that I think are so humongously complex that they're often sort of communicated in these large graphs or through, you know, 1,000-word essays, and it's like, oh wow, it's like 12 simple concepts. I probably got the number wrong, but it's like 12 simple concepts about where are you on a scale yourself and in relation to others. And for me, it's provided me with the ability to understand what gaps I have in my own knowledge, but moreover, I'd say it's really shone a light for me on the work that I need to do in preparing for conversations with people from different backgrounds. And when I say backgrounds, like, I don't just mean like culturally, nationally, demographically. I mean, like, even within different parts of my business, like how I would talk to someone in IT compared to someone in comms. Like, there is a distinct group of, they may be very high on uncertainty avoidance, others may be very low. I realized, do you know what, there's really a way for me to reduce that rework cycle and increase my efficiency just from a business perspective by implementing what I've learned at CQ. But I'd say the key lesson that I take personally from this, it's helped me consider where I'm at in my comfort zone. My comfort zone as a person on some things, and one thing in particular, there's a scale of individualism and collectivism. You know, one which is really about groups and relationships, which is that collectivist approach. And for me, that's really where my natural tendency is. And, you know, it means you like other people to talk first, you respond, you listen, you nurture that relationship. But what the sort of the program gave me was the language to say, that's where I'm most comfortable, but I'm in stretch mode when I'm going to individualist mode, and I might have to do that as a leader and share my vision and speak first and lead a team. Doesn't mean I can't, but knowing and naming my natural preferred state it's really empowered me to give the language to how I need to nurture my own growth, and that has been very valuable indeed.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's so true. And as Emily says in her comment, you know, CQ can be applied across nations, or it can be between two people, and it's, you know, obviously your own kind of individual journey as well. And so, how have you used CQ? Just staying with you, Tim, just as it flows on, you know, with your clients in your previous roles. I think you did do some coaching, or maybe you can elaborate what you've done.
Yeah, so in a previous organisation, I actually used CQ as effectively a team building exercise. So we each completed a CQ assessment. We got our results back, and the results were across the spectrum. You know, some people write at, you know, this end, some people write at this end. And it gave us, you know, to your point, it gave us the language to name some of the barriers towards increased engagement and productivity. You know, some of us were highly individualist, some of us were very high on low power distance, and, you know, some of the challenges we didn't know we had came out, and it was better that eureka moment of, oh, that's why you do it the way you do. I can understand that now. And so really it was a tool to help us listen to each other, and that was the core nub of it. I think what really came out of that, as I say, one thing was a conversation with a framework of language. The other thing that came out of it was just a really simple exercise. And the simple exercise that I managed to implement as a result of that was, we realized part of the challenge was uncertainty and different ways of communicating. Right, so each week, here's one piece of communication. This is the stuff that we're going to be working on this week. These are our outcomes that we're aiming for. Done. And then that was just, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve everything, but it's one step towards acknowledging that some people are very low on uncertainty avoidance. We recognize that. Let's implement that. Let's do something. So that's an outcome really that's played out after using that as a team building exercise. It's built that cohesion, and it's allowed a space for people to use that framework and that language to say, now I understand you a bit better.
Thank you. Yeah, that's, it's so true that, once say that some of your team are low on certainty avoidance, which for those who don't know means basically you have a pretty relaxed attitude to risk and you can kind of flex pretty easily. So then maybe you can give them things to do that actually, allow them to kind of roll with that, whereas your high on certainty avoidance people would, shy away in horror from such a, from doing something like that, or whatever it is, it's sort of maximizing their strengths basically, and not making it be an area of conflict potentially in a team. What about you, Sharon? And I'm going to come to you, Kat, because I realize we haven't heard from you for a while. I don't know, how have you used CQ so far within the work that you do? You maybe already touched on that, but if there's anything else you want to kind of add.
Well, what I've started to do is sprinkle elements of CQ into what I do. It's not something you can just, you have to build people up into to receive it. So I think there's certainly scope to do more around CQ, specifically for those involved in employee network groups. So that's something I'm looking to work on a bit more. But so far, I've just been sprinkling the idea and introducing certain things just to give people a little bit of, let me think about how I handle certain things, because it can be quite high pressured, lots of emotion when you're involved in networks, sometimes lots of pressure and so on. So it's about how do I equip them with some of those tools to start thinking about how to deal with that in a better way. So I would say I haven't gone straight in because I really want to think about it and I want to get it right.
Yeah.
But I have started to sprinkle some thoughts and ideas, just in the mix of what I'm already doing. And then it's about, right, well, how do I develop something that's really going to work and help them be effective in what they're trying to do as a network or as a resource group?
Yeah, well, that makes total sense, because you want to be able to, there is a lot, as you say, the training, like the first level training is a sort of day and a half, but it's really quite intense. You really learn a lot in that day and a half, and it takes a while to sort of, digest it and figure out how best to use it, in the work that you're doing. And Kat, I don't know, how do you see the relevance of CQ within the setup that you've got there at ISS? Hear me okay? I don't know if she heard me. Kat, did you hear my question? I think you might be having connection problems. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh no, I think I've been kicked out.
No, you're here. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh right, perfect. Now I can. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. No, I was just wondering how you see the relevance of CQ within the setup of your global organization there at ISS.
Yeah, I think it definitely fits in terms of sort of a business. To say we are a global organization with 400,000 people across the world. So I suppose one thing, we are in quite early stages of this, again with D&I sort of now being a particular role within the business. But I suppose one thing that really resonates for me is around our employee value proposition, which took a lot of developing to make sure it was inclusive across the whole globe, and which is be who you are, become what you want, and be part of something bigger. That resonates with absolutely every single dimension of diversity. So the discussion that's happened today, I think, is actually really useful for me, again, to take away back into the business again about what our next steps are.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We're bang on time. I can't quite believe it. How did that happen? It's amazing. I'm really grateful to all three of you for taking the time to talk to me today. And I'm sure everyone would have really enjoyed it. I'm sorry if we don't have time for questions. I hope I haven't missed anything. I think people have just put comments. But thank you all so much, and look forward to carrying on conversations offline.
Thank you, Polly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye. I think now I'm handing over to Ritika, who's going to be talking to our next speaker. I'm going to bow out for a little bit.
And the wonderful switch. Here we are. That was wonderful panel, Polly. Thanks for navigating it. And the panelists were superb, wonderful. Just great to hear everyone's thoughts and their stories. So back to me. I have the most wonderful Christina Brooks as my next speaker in this conference. Christina, waiting for you on the stage, the grand entry. There she is. There she is. You hear me?
Hi, Rebecca. Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So Christina Brooks is the founder and CEO of an organization called Rubik, pairing exceptional talent in diverse spaces. Yes?
That's the one.
So Christina and I met each other through a lot of common spaces and people, and I'm just absolutely not only just grateful that Christina took the time out to come on this conference for us and share her wisdom, but also, you know, I know Christina's story and her work is so powerful that the world can benefit from it. So I just want to hear it. I want to dive straight into it, Christina. I want to hear your purpose, your why. So tell us about yourself and how you ended up doing what you're doing and why you do what you do.
Okay, big question, big opener. I suppose if I take a step back and think about the conversation we're having today, I have somebody who has very much felt out of place and that I don't fit into any one environment, and not for the obvious reasons that you might think. So protected characteristics, Black female, one thing, but I grew up outside of London in Gloucestershire. So in a really small town where there wasn't very much diversity at all. Most people there were predominantly British born, and my mum had come to this country in the early 60s when the signs were still visible, sort of on the pubs, in restaurants, where it was kind of like no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. That was the world in which she was brought up in here in this country. And so, as you can imagine, that framed her perspective of the UK, and we were brought up with knowing that we were different very visibly because this was not our home. My mum always referred to Jamaica as being back home. So when people would ask me, where are you from? I would be like, wait, Gloucester, Britain, Jamaica? I don't know, like which one? So I've always had that sense of displacement. And I think where we're starting to collect data now around, well, what does diversity look like? I'm somebody that didn't go to university. So I'm from a very lower socioeconomic background, from a single parent, really working class. I mean, I remember collecting vouchers with my brother when we were little so that we could afford milk and bread and staples because my mum had 4 kids to raise. And because I didn't go to university, Ritika, it meant that when I was trying to apply for jobs that I looked at and thought, oh my God, I'd be incredible at this, I couldn't even get onto the apprenticeship or graduate programs because I didn't have the qualifications. And so a lot of that informed my sense of just because somebody has or hasn't gone to a university, it shouldn't restrict the access that they have to opportunities, because actually it should boil down to skill set and competencies. So I left school and started working immediately, really hustled hard until I could afford my first property at 21. When I afforded my first property at 21, I decided to go traveling, ended up living in Italy for 2 years, absorbing their culture. I loved it, the food, the wine, the people, the history, the heritage. And so that was a real kind of growth for me. I spent 4 years at the BBC. That was my university. That was really kind of, if anybody does say, like, have you been to university? Tongue in cheek, I say, yeah, the BBC. I did a business degree, and it was incredible. And Ritika, so my thirst now, Rubik, what we are committed to doing is to providing access to opportunities for underserved communities, because of my experience right from the outset, kind of seeing all of those blockers. I think those days are over, and I think the world has woken up to it. Clearly, George Floyd was a real catalyst for conversations around who is around the table, communities around the table, and how some communities have been completely isolated and left out from conversations. So the organizations that we work with now truly, really deeply, truly want to be reflective of communities. And that's what we provide, access to networks which have previously been overlooked.
I've heard you so many times. I've heard you so many times, and yet I'm always riveted. I just sit there taking every word in because it's so powerful. Your connect between who you are, what you've become, and what you do with that is such a powerful thread right there. Here's someone who has gone through that experience and come out of it wanting to make the world a better place for those that not just look like you.
Yes, exactly.
Those hidden identities, or the blockers, as you said. And so it's, and this is how I genuinely feel the world will be changed because of people like yourself and for what you do, because I've seen you do that with passion, opening the doors up for those that don't have the access and desperately need to. It is so interesting. And I want to deviate a little bit from the planned conversation, Christina, around what are your thoughts with Gen Z then? So you're saying, it's not, I see it's not a job for life anymore. So in the work that you do around recruitment and around the organizations you work with, where do you see it going?
Portfolio careers. Ritika, honestly, truly, I think that in the next 5-6 years, what we will see is people holding several roles at one time. And so where we've seen this in practice during COVID was the side hustle. I think that a lot more people felt confident saying, well, yeah, great, this is my 9 to 5, my day to day, but on the side, I've got an amazing business that's thriving on Etsy, or I'm selling products on Amazon, or, I'm looking at becoming a marketing or web designer. We've already seen that. So that the conversation around it is not new. So side hustle, I think, will convert into portfolio, where organizations are open to attracting skills. And I think when we really become progressive and really smart, our job specs will no longer look as they are today for somebody permanently employed. It will be project based. So it's, Ritika, please can you come in and join our organization to work on this set project? And if you've got 3 or 4 doing that, it means that you're diversifying your breadth of skills, experience, and they are gaining exponentially from that, because you then are bringing the outside in. You're not just stuck with tunnel vision, kind of sat in an organization as we were previously for 5, 10, 15 years. It's like, oh, well, actually, I work over in this startup and here's how they do things differently. Or the FTSE organization that I work with for a couple of days a week, here's how they're thinking. So it means we're getting that real kind of diversity of thought, experience, and skill.
And there's a question I want to lead into with that thought. But what is the USP of Rubik?
Our USP is that we, as a business, every single one in the team, and we are a small team. We are the David in the market to the Goliaths. We are all a product of the problem we're trying to solve. We all have deeply lived experiences that mean that we are both qualified and dedicated to shifting the dial around diversity. So where a lot of search firms, Ritika, will talk about diversity, that's only one aspect, because if you've not lived it, felt it, had experience, then it doesn't, your talent pool feel that. And if I think about prior to building Rubik, Ritika, I was a global talent lead at Rolls-Royce in the talent acquisition function. And there were 3 key problems that I found, not from an organizational perspective, but just from an industry perspective, is that at that point in time in 2016, a lot of organizations really over-indexed on women. So the gender conversation was the only one. So we lost a lot of incredible talent because we weren't looking at intersectionality. It also meant when we got fantastic senior females into the business, they felt like a token hire because we were only talking about the metrics and the statistics that we were driving for gender. And then thirdly, I found that it was a broken industry. There were not enough recruitment firms that really had diversity amongst their own leadership. They looked and sounded like the business I was trying to change. And that's how Rubik came into existence. Our USP is we started having a conversation long before it was relevant in the market. We built a truly inclusive business, which means that we can engage and enter communities, network spaces in an authentic way that most search firms can't. And for us, talent attraction, so recruitment, is only one part of the conversation. It's nothing without retention development, which is why we have the consulting arm to that as well, Ritika.
Love that. And this is where that, thank you for articulating that. This is where, Christina, I wanted to bring in CQ then the relevance of cultural intelligence around everything that you've mentioned so far, not just what the future looks like for Gen Z and portfolio careers and how cultural intelligence comes into the mix there, but even for the now, the organizations we're looking at and the challenges that they're facing. So tell us a bit then about your journey into CQ and what have you found within cultural intelligence that sort of fits what you're doing with your clients?
Everything, Ritika, everything. I think so we can't have a conversation around DEI without CQ. The two have to work like this. And I think that they both feed into each other. So historically, that hasn't been the case. And I think that we are fortunate enough to live in London, where I think we are highly attuned to other cultures. And so because of our neighborhoods, the way that we interface, we have that kind of knowledge and that insight. Just in my family alone, Ritika, I think I've got a nephew who has Moroccan in him, he has Greek in him. My sister's married to a Cypriot, so it's in and around us. But from an organizational perspective, it is key when people start getting this right, thinking about cultural intelligence. It just is an incredible framework for us to fit the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion into.
It is a strategic link, isn't it? Because I've worked with organizations where even within DEI, they'll say we don't want to talk about privilege and we don't want to talk about those. We want the impact. And so using the cultural intelligence framework, it's very much going back to the drive, not just for the challenges that your clients face on a day-to-day around recruitment, hiring, retention, development, etc., but also for the candidates. It's how do the candidates, what motivates them to apply for these roles? And then when they're there, how do they use their cultural intelligence to make it work for them, whether that's an apprentice or whether that's someone that's been in the organization for 30 years.
Absolutely. And I think that the attraction piece is incredibly important when it comes to CQ as well, Ritika, because I think that gone are the days where we can just expect our candidates to kind of rock up to interviews and it's like, great, what can you do for us? What can you do for us? We've got to completely reimagine how we are approaching different communities, different underserved groups, in making your organization a bit of a beacon and a go-to in terms of inclusion. And again, that's all underpinned by CQ.
There's also the cultural values aspect, and there's the exec leadership. There's also how the teams work together. You talked about the 3 challenges when you worked in your previous role.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of that has gone away yet. Those challenges around gender, around tokenism, around the broken industry, that sort of, what do you think? I'm
No,
curious.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I think that that's why I felt that it was so crucial to have a stake in the conversation, because it has not gone away. And I think that we're only scratching the surface of it. I think that organizations who are really driving cultural intelligence and inclusion move away from discussion around metrics, Ritika. I think that it doesn't serve us going to the market and being so overt about the amount of people we need to hire and what the percentage looks like. You know, what isn't measured isn't done. So I get that there's the measuring element of it, and we need to know that from a data perspective. But what I would love to hear organizations saying more of is, what does it mean for me to belong here? It means that our straight white male allies also have a stake in the conversation. It's like, great, this is about belonging, because not everybody identifies as being diverse, even though it means difference of lived experiences, perspectives, etc. But I think when we start to frame it around belonging and what does it mean for me to belong and be included in this organization, then we've got a better chance of moving the dial.
Absolutely. And I think those, even, you know, there's so many facets to the toolbox that is CQ. But, you know, the cultural values, if you just looked at how a person, you know, your background is so diverse and how you were brought up, let alone how you look and all of that. But behind the scenes, the culture in your family, how cold was treated, or how you interacted with other people within your family as well. I think those cultural values then shape who we become when we get into work, the preferences. And the question around that is then, how do we understand each other's cultural values in a way that reduces conflict, in a way that creates the psychological safety that is required for us to belong? And so, yeah.
Ratika, I mean, spot on. And it's the iceberg. When it comes to cultural values, it's the iceberg that a lot of, like, it's unseen. And so what most people don't see, you know, when you're at a networking event or you're, you know, a client meeting, etc., you've just met somebody, but they won't know that at home, I live in a multi-generational household. I had to move my mum in with me during COVID. So I care for my mum, my young son, who's 6 years old. He has autism and non-verbal autism. I live with my husband, as I said, who is an exotic creature from Essex, who is that straight white male, Ratika. So it's so hard to kind of demonstrate the multifaceted cultural kind of intersectionalities that you have in one home. So you put that in an organizational setting, and that's like, this is so important to get this right.
Wow, thank you, Christina. We've got 2 minutes, and I don't want to end this conversation. Is there, you know, I have such burning questions around allyship and bringing everyone together, and your thoughts around, you know, I was at an event yesterday where it was, you know, that we have spoken so much about gender equity that almost you're leaving everyone else behind. And so how do we make it into a conversation where everybody is on the level playing field and wants to do this work because it's the right thing to do?
Yeah. And I think it's more role modeling allyship. So us talking and sharing the stories about what that looks like. And if I think about my own experience and my own example, I have an incredible sponsor / mentor I've never met, Ratika. We've never met in person. We've only met in a Teams environment. And he was introduced to me early on in COVID. And we met and had a great conversation. At the time, he was a chairman of an online digital insurance business. And when COVID hit, he checked in with me sort of 4 months later. And he's like, Christina, what can I do for you? He's like, is there anything that I can do to help you in your business to make sure you survive these difficult times? And I said, oh God, you know, I really couldn't think. I was like, look, just thank you for calling. And he's like, would it help if I put £5,000 in your account? And I said, Jason, I was like, actually, I said, if you put 25 in my account, that will absolutely, I will make gold of that. And he was like, okay, brilliant. By the end of our conversation, it was done. He had put that into my bank account. And at the end of that year, we'd made like £650,000 during COVID, because I was like, I cannot let you down. I have got this incredible sponsor who has shown up for me as a true ally. I've never met the man, Ratika, and he put 25,000. I was like, is this a loan? Do you want interest? Is this equity? And he was like, if you don't make a penny from it, he's like, I don't mind. That's yours to lose. Literally. So we have to role model allyship and talk about the experiences that we have from our straight white colleagues and supporters and friends, and show others how to show up. and what it means.
Beautiful. And this is, again, one of my favorite parts of the CQ model is really even within allyship, understanding when to stand up and when to stand down.
Yes.
It's that dynamic of flexing, adapting, and how you use your knowledge into the action, the strategy into the action part. I can't believe we are at time. That went by really, really quickly. And I'm ever so grateful for not just your time, but the pearls of wisdom that you've shared with me and the audience. Thank you so much, Christina. I wish you the absolute best in what you're doing.
Thank you, Ritika.
And thank you. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Hello, I'm just jumping on stage a little bit unexpectedly again, just to let you know that we have Lynn, but we are experiencing one or two minor technical issues with Lynn, not with Lynn, with Lynn's computer. So if you do have anything else that you feel like you've cut the conversation short, or if there are any questions that have come in, please feel free to continue, just because, yeah, we do have a little bit of time to spare. So I didn't want to spring that on you unnecessarily, but you're very welcome to continue.
Sure, I could talk to Christina all day. I don't know if she needs to go.
Yeah, I've got another 2 minutes, Ritika, if that's helpful for you guys.
No, that's all right. What I mean, if so, just one question then, Christina, which I did cut short and I had on my list, was what, to the audience listening in from all over the world,
Yes.
in all sorts of time zones, from your experience in this work, if there
Yes.
was one thing that you would give them to take away, a nugget of wisdom, what would it be?
So give me some more, Ritika. In what context?
Anything from the conversation that we've had, from your experience, from literally the work that you do out there. What is it that you would want them to do?
Okay. So speaking to your to the audience who are hiring managers and in a position where they're making decisions on the talent that's coming through the door, I would love for them to ensure that their suppliers that they're working with have representation within their businesses. So please don't just gravitate towards recruitment firms, exec search firms that are not walking the walk. Please hold their feet to the fire, because what they should be presenting to you in any kind of candidate pool is a reflection of the community that you sit in. So in London, when we think about our candidate slates, we always ensure that it's a 50-50 gender shortlist, that it's 30% ethnically diverse, 10% being Black heritage. So there should be statistics around your local community and what your makeup is, and really ensure that you're getting a really good sight of that.
Thank you for that, Christina. Yeah, I absolutely agree, because there is the whole representation, but there's also, again, that whole angle of inclusion and belonging and making sure that it isn't tokenistic hiring, but how. And then we do have, for those that are listening in, we do have the tool CQ Talent that can be used very fruitfully and gainfully within organizations and recruitment firms to do exactly that, find that culture fit, culture mat, make sure that there's representation for all the right reasons. So thank you, Christina. I know you said you needed to go, so really grateful for that extra time we've had as well. And yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ritika. Take care. Bye-bye.
Right, Emily, did you want to come back on the stage? How is it going?
Well, I mean, I might as well, right?
Right.
In true live event style, we are just frantically troubleshooting behind the scenes. It all went perfectly in rehearsal, as these things tend to do, but this is live entertainment, folks. So it is what it is. We are still working with Lynn to try and get her sound up and running. So I think it was Chris Williams earlier in the day, if you were watching, well, he was actually in the green room when he said this. He said, if there are any more technical problems, that I should sing Angels by Robbie Williams.
Can you please do that?
I'm really not.
I need to go open the door because the kids are standing outside in the rain. Can you sing while I'm back in 1 minute?
I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to do is just put us on pause. I think we now have Lynn. So I'm going to head back to the green room very, very briefly and just make sure we're good to go. And I'll set Lynn up in just a second. Please bear with me.
I apologize. I can't hear, but I can see, and I understand that you can hear me. So thank you very much, Polly, Ritika, and Emily. I'm so happy to be here with you today. I love talking about CQ, and these virtual sessions make that possible. I have 3 objectives for our time together. First, like everyone else, I want to share my story and explain how I got interested in cultural intelligence. Second, I will share some graphs that summarize some of the very exciting CQ research results. And third, I will talk briefly about our newest workshop, CQ for Teams. First, my story. Before I got my PhD, I was head of the HR department for a multinational organization. And as part of my job, I sent expatriates all over the world. And they all had strong track records. They all were willing to go abroad, but we were terrible at predicting who would be successful and who would fail. For example, I knew an expatriate, this is many years ago, but he always wanted to know when I would be visiting next so that I could bring his family Cheerios and peanut butter. This was before those products were widely available. Obviously, this family was not adjusting. The expatriate experience was not working, but we didn't know why. Later in graduate school, I met Dr. Soon Ang. We were in different departments. We had different cultural backgrounds, and yet we had similar research interests. Soon had been studying programmers and wanted to gain a better understanding of why some programmers were more effective in multicultural teams. I was interested in studying why expatriates, like the people that I just described, why were some expatriates so much more effective than others? Soon and I believed in the power of diversity and diverse perspectives. And so we decided to collaborate and address the question of why some individuals function more effectively in multicultural situations. I spent my sabbatical in Singapore, and I worked with Soon and a multicultural team to develop and test a new measure of cultural intelligence. 4 years later, we began publishing validity evidence that says that CQ predicts many different cultural effectiveness outcomes. This is important because other measures of cultural competence don't provide evidence of what they predict. You should be seeing a new slide now. I'd like to talk about myths. I and the CQ Center believe that research-based facts are really important because sometimes people assume that common sense is good enough. I call common sense myths. For example, there are 2 bullets on this slide. Both of them are myths. Sometimes people think, oh, those with a lot of international experience are going to automatically have high CQ. Well, you could have a lot of frequent flyer miles, but if you stay in familiar hotels and if you engage primarily with the people you're traveling with, you're not going to interact with locals, and your CQ won't increase. The second bullet also is a myth. Diversity does not necessarily predict innovation. And that's because diversity can cause confusion and frustration. However, diversity combined with CQ does indeed predict innovation. So another way to say that is CQ allows us to gain the benefits of diverse perspectives. The bottom line, we need to go beyond common sense. We need to rely on research facts. And luckily, there's a lot of research on cultural intelligence. Many scholars all over the world have contributed to the research on CQ. Therefore, we know a lot about CQ. CQ research has been conducted in more than 150 countries. More than 250,000 people have completed CQ assessments. More than 1,000 published papers on CQ. And CQ research has been published in over 600 academic journals in different disciplines: psychology, education, accounting, economics, management, leadership, diversity, HR, healthcare. I could go on. And it's wonderful to realize that many different disciplines recognize the value of CQ. But I only have 20 minutes, so I will keep going. Now I'm going to move to part 2 of my talk, and I'm going to show you 4 graphs. This graph shows a positive relationship between cultural effectiveness, between cultural intelligence and cultural effectiveness. The higher the CQ, the higher the effectiveness. I'll pause and let you read this list of outcomes. Psychological safety, knowledge sharing, performance, innovation. This is an impressive list. I must note quickly, it's incomplete. So CQ also shows that the relationship between diversity and cultural effectiveness is positive only when diversity is combined with CQ. So you'll notice that there are two lines on this graph. The high CQ is got a steeper slope. That means it's a stronger relationship. At low CQ, effectiveness would be low. So we're comparing effectiveness when there's not CQ with effectiveness when there is CQ. And we say that CQ strengthens the relationship between diversity and effectiveness. And technically, this low CQ line, that's not even statistically significant. Here's another slide. It's the flip side. My first two slides talked about good things. This and the next slide both talk about things that are not so good. Anxiety is negatively related to cultural effectiveness. Oftentimes, differences make people uncomfortable, and they don't interact, they don't engage, they don't reach out. Importantly, this slide shows that what started out as a negative relationship between anxiety and cultural effectiveness, when there's high CQ, that relationship gets weaker. So CQ weakens the negative relationships between anxiety and cultural effectiveness. To summarize, CQ strengthens positive relationships, it makes good things better, and CQ reduces negative relationships. CQ makes bad things less negative. Now I've come to my third objective, and I'm going to talk briefly about our newest workshop, CQ for Teams. We created CQ for Teams in response to customer requests for a session that was more focused on practical application of the CQ framework to help multicultural teams. This is an exciting workshop with lots of practical tools to enhance relationships and effectiveness in teams. People can attend as an individual who wants to become a better team member, or people can attend as an intact team that wants to improve as a whole. Now, the workshop includes a variety of activities, such as animated scenarios for individuals and teams to diagnose, breakout rooms where participants work together on practical application of specific tools for teams, such as mapping cultural value differences in the team. And this is what Tim was describing earlier. They also work on figuring out what's their motivation to bridge differences. You can't just suddenly decide that, oh, I'm going to bridge differences. You have to figure out, why am I motivated to do that? What might I benefit from? What might my team benefit from? And they also spend time developing strategies for bridging differences. In conclusion, I will be glad to answer any questions you might have. I've put my email address up on the screen. Just send me an email and I will be glad to respond. And thank you for your time and attention, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I know sadly you can't hear what I'm saying, but for the benefit of everyone else, I'm sure you all found that as, you know, sort of beneficial, just to sort of hear the little bit more about the science behind the framework. I'm just going to check in and see my internal chat just to see what's going on there, because oh, hang on, there's Lynn again. Sorry, guys. Okay, that's what's happening. I think it's just incredibly difficult now for anyone to ask Lynn a question through the chat. But if you do want to put something in there, we'll do our best to transcribe it to her, because she can see an internal chat that we can relay to her. Otherwise, I think we may have to leave it there, and perhaps if anyone wants to message us, we're going to put contact details at the end of this in a short while, just so that we can, put any questions to Lynn a bit later on, and then she can reply in more detail. I'm sure she'd be happy to do that. So I think, Emily, probably the best thing is if, Ritika perhaps joins me just to close things off, because it's just really awkward doing that with Lynn not being able to hear. It's such a shame. Look, Ritika, now I can't hear you. I don't know if anyone else can. Oh, you're on mute, that's why.
I was on mute.
My God.
Bring on the glitches. I was just saying,
saying,
thank you. It was just so nice to have Lynn on, supporting this event, as a founder of CQ Center, sharing her wisdom with us. I'm sure the audience was very grateful to have her on as well. And I'm just so glad we were able to bag her as the closing act. So thank you, Lynn. And really just what a phenomenal event. In spite of all the technical glitches, these things happen. I know Emily was nervous for a long time. And this morning I had to tell her that we went, I had gone to another event where everything blacked out for half an hour. I mean, what can you do? This is the life in the virtual world. But all our panelists were here. We heard them, we saw them, and ever so grateful for everything that they shared with us. I hope that the audience is walking away with lots of inspiration, motivation, and more importantly, the absolute necessity of CQ, not just from a heart-centered leadership, but also head-centered. So you heard from all our panelists and the speakers on their personal story, their CQ drive, what got them to what they're doing in the first place in such very different fields, varying sectors and industries. And then we heard from Lynn on the statistics, the absolute research, the business case for CQ, which is a no-brainer, and the relevance of the CQ framework in the multicultural, diverse, digital and divided world that we operate in right now. So really grateful for everyone that took the time out to join us today. Extremely thankful and appreciative of all our speakers and panelists. And more so Emily and Polly as well for holding the stage and going along with it, with the flow. We've all walked away from it a little bit more confident that these things happen and you just have to get on with it. So thank you. Polly, over to you.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say, I've really enjoyed hearing all the different reasons that people that have brought people to CQ, whether it was living in different cultures as a child, whether it was feeling unclear about your identity and not being accepted for who you are, or whether it was suffering horrible discrimination. And then, thinking, hearing from people about why they think CQ matters. And there were some things that were said today that really resonate, like it makes sense in a borderless world. It's the only way to stay relevant was a very powerful one. And just the fact that it provides language for painful and difficult conversations. And then, of course, the all-important statistics piece, that what Jennifer Ezekiel said right at the beginning of the afternoon, 40% increase in recruitment of Black and minority ethnic individuals in an organization in which she'd rolled out one of her CQ and inclusive leadership programs. I mean, that's incredible. And really just, of course, as you said, Ritika, just hearing from Lynn about, the undeniable fact that, CQ really is the sort of secret sauce for just, transforming a diverse group into a successful group, because you really need that added something to make it work. So thank you so much for listening. And if you've stuck with us through all the technical problems, that's really impressive. And please do reach out to us through, we've got the email there, hello@culturalq.co.uk. And obviously, if any questions occur to you also for Lynn, who we were unable to have a proper conversation with, then please use that, and also check out our website and keep an eye on social media, on our LinkedIn page for future events that we'll be planning. So I think that's it. And just to say, if you want to relive today's experience, you can do, because we can send you a recording. Not sure I'll be able to watch it, But you
without
may
the
want to
technical glitches, so that
exactly,
works.
you can have the advantage of speeding through the parts that were a bit more painful. But thank you so much, and we've enjoyed it despite the ups and downs, and hope to see you again.
Definitely enjoyed it, and huge thanks to Emily in the background and to Paul and his team for getting on with it and doing such a brilliant job with it. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, big thanks.